At my son's funeral, his wife's lover leaned over the open casket and whispered, "Don't worry, old man, I will spend his millions better than he did." The audacity hung in the cold air like the smell of rotting flowers. He thought he had won. He thought the game was over. Suddenly, a low chuckle echoed from inside the coffin. The lover froze. The weeping stopped. My dead son sat up, fixed his tie, and looked the man in the eye. Because the man standing over him is about to realize that some secrets refuse to stay buried. My name is Douglas Hayes. I am 68 years old, and I have spent my entire life building a logistics empire in Atlanta from nothing but grit and a single second-hand truck. I learned early on that the world does not give men like me second chances, so I made sure I never needed them. I thought I had taught my son, Terrence, everything I knew about survival. But as I sat in the front row of St. Mark's Cathedral, gripping the head of my oak cane until my knuckles turned the color of ash, I wondered if I had failed him. Before I continue this story of betrayal and resurrection, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to smile at a snake to keep from getting bitten. The atmosphere in the cathedral was suffocating. It smelled of expensive lilies and old money, a combination I have always detested. Lilies are the perfume of death. They are used to mask the scent of decay, just as this entire ceremony was being used to mask a crime. I sat rigid in my black suit, my eyes scanning the room. The pews were filled with people who claimed to love my son, business partners who were already calculating how to carve up his market share, distant cousins who had not visited in a decade but suddenly appeared when they smelled an inheritance. But the most offensive performance of all was happening right next to me. Courtney, my daughter-in-law, was a vision of tragic beauty in her designer black dress. She sobbed into a lace handkerchief, her shoulders shaking with what looked like uncontrollable grief. To the rest of the congregation, she was a broken widow. But I was sitting close enough to see the truth. Every time she buried her face in that handkerchief, her eyes remained bone dry. Down in her lap, hidden by the folds of her dress and a large bouquet of roses, her thumb was moving at lightning speed across the screen of her phone. The blue light reflected faintly on the tip of her nose. She was not texting condolences. I glanced sideways, just for a second, and saw the banking app open on her screen. She was checking the balance of the joint account she shared with Terrence. She was refreshing the page, waiting for the life insurance payout to hit. I felt a surge of bile rise in my throat. I wanted to stand up and scream. I wanted to tell everyone that this woman had spent the last 3 months poisoning my boy with small doses of arsenic in his protein shakes. I wanted to tell them that the tears on her face were as fake as the vows she made 6 years ago. But I remained silent. I kept my face impassive, a mask of stone. "Patience, Douglas," I told myself. "The trap is set. You just have to wait for the rat to take the cheese." Then, the heavy oak doors at the back of the cathedral creaked open. The timing was theatrical. A hush fell over the room as Hunter walked in. He did not walk like a man coming to pay his respects. He walked like a man coming to claim a prize. Hunter was a venture capitalist, or so he called himself. In reality, he was a predator in a 3-piece suit, a man who had been smiling at my son for years while sleeping with his wife. He strode down the center aisle, his chin held high, ignoring the whispers. He was the only white man in the room who looked like he owned the place. He stopped at our pew. He looked down at me with a gaze that was a mixture of pity and contempt. To him, I was just a washed-up old man, a relic of a bygone era who was now alone and vulnerable. He placed a hand on Courtney's shoulder. It was supposed to be a comforting gesture for the public, a friend consoling a widow. But I saw the way Courtney leaned into his touch. I saw the slight smirk that tugged at the corner of Hunter's mouth. It was intimate. It was possessive. It made my skin crawl. Hunter walked past us and approached the open casket. The tradition of viewing the body one last time is sacred in our community. It is a moment for goodbyes, for prayers. But Hunter turned it into a moment of desecration. He stood over Terrence, looking down at my son's peaceful face. Terrence looked sharp in his navy blue suit, his hands folded over his chest. Hunter leaned in close, resting his hands on the edges of the mahogany coffin. He looked like he was whispering a final prayer. The congregation watched with bated breath, moved by this display of friendship. But my hearing is still sharp, and because I was in the front row, I heard every word. Hunter leaned down until his lips were inches from Terrence's ear. "Rest easy, buddy," he whispered, his voice dripping with venom. You died right on time. I will take care of Courtney really well, and I will take even better care of those offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands." He straightened up, patting the edge of the coffin as if it were the hood of a new car he just bought. He turned his head slightly, locking eyes with me. He didn't even bother to lower his voice to a whisper this time. He spoke clearly enough for me, and only me, to hear. "Don't worry, old man," he said, flashing a dazzling, predatory smile. "I will spend his millions better than he ever did. You just focus on finding a nice nursing home. I'll handle the legacy." The rage that exploded in my chest was hot enough to melt steel. My grip on my cane tightened so hard the wood groaned. I wanted to swing it. I wanted to smash that arrogant smile right off his face. But I didn't have to, because I wasn't the only one who heard him. I looked at the coffin. I started counting in my head. 3, 2, 1. A sound cut through the silence of the cathedral. It was a low, guttural sound. Huck! Hunter froze. He was halfway turned around, ready to walk back to his seat, but he stopped dead in his tracks. He frowned, looking around as if wondering where the noise came from. Courtney, who had been dabbing her dry eyes, stopped moving. Her hand froze in midair. Then it came again, louder this time. A distinct, unmistakable chuckle. Heh! 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 The sound was coming from inside the box. Gasps rippled through the congregation. A woman in the third row screamed. The priest dropped his prayer book. Hunter spun around, his face draining of all color. He stared at the coffin as if it were a bomb about to detonate. "Impossible," he muttered, his voice trembling. He checked the pulse. The doctor checked the pulse. The heavy mahogany lid of the coffin began to vibrate. Then, with a smooth, hydraulic hiss, the hidden latch released. My son, Terrence, who had been pronounced dead 48 hours ago, sat up. The movement was stiff but powerful. He gripped the sides of the coffin with hands that were very much alive. He turned his head, cracking his neck from side to side as if he had just woken up from a long nap. The cathedral erupted into chaos. People were jumping over pews. The choir was shrieking. But in the center of the storm, 3 people were locked in a moment of absolute stillness. Me, the father who knew the truth. Hunter, the lover who was seeing a ghost. And Terrence, the man who had returned from hell. Terrence reached up and adjusted his silk tie, making sure the knot was perfect. He looked healthy, he looked strong, and he looked furious. He slowly turned his gaze toward Hunter, whose knees were shaking so hard I could hear them knocking together. Terrence locked eyes with the man who had just confessed to stealing his life and his money. A slow, terrifying smile spread across my son's face. "I don't think so, Hunter," Terrence said, his voice booming through the silent acoustics of the church, strong and clear. "You might have the girl, and you might have the plans, but you got the password to the Cayman accounts wrong." Hunter stumbled back, tripping over a wreath of white roses and crashing to the floor. Courtney fainted, or perhaps she just realized that playing dead was her only option now. I finally relaxed my grip on my cane. I leaned back in the pew, crossed my legs, and watched the show begin. The funeral was over. The execution was about to start. The silence in the cathedral shattered like a stained glass window hit by a brick. My son Terrence stepped out of that mahogany box not as a ghost, but as a man possessed by righteous fury. He stood tall on the altar, the silk lining of the coffin trailing behind him like a royal cape. The congregation erupted into a frenzy of screams and prayers, with half the room convinced they were witnessing a miracle and the other half terrified they were seeing a zombie. But I kept my eyes locked on the 2 sinners standing frozen at the foot of the casket. Courtney looked as if her soul had left her body. Her face, which had been so perfectly composed in false grief just moments ago, was now a mask of pure terror. She took a stumbling step back, her high heels catching on the plush carpet. She reached out for Hunter, desperate for protection, but the coward was already backing away. Hunter, the man who had just bragged about spending my son's millions, looked like a rat caught in a floodlight. He spun around, his eyes darting toward the side exit, calculating his escape route. Not today, I thought. I moved with a speed that defied my 68 years. I swung my heavy oak cane outward, the brass handle connecting solidly with the wooden pew in front of Hunter, blocking his path. He slammed into the barrier, nearly losing his balance. "Going somewhere, Hunter?" I asked, my voice cutting through the din of the panicked crowd. "The funeral is not over yet. We haven't even gotten to the eulogy." Hunter snarled at me, his handsome face twisted into something ugly and desperate. "Move out of my way, old man. You don't know who you are messing with." "I think I know exactly who I am messing with," I replied, standing my ground. "I am messing with the man who thought he could steal my family's legacy while sleeping in my son's bed." Up on the altar, Terrence descended the steps. He moved slowly, deliberately, like a predator closing in on wounded prey. He stopped inches from his wife. Courtney was trembling so violently that the diamond necklace she wore, a gift from Terrence for their last anniversary, shook against her collarbone. "Did you think I wouldn't taste it, Courtney?" Terrence asked, his voice deceptively calm. "Did you think I wouldn't notice that my protein shakes started tasting like bitter almonds 3 months ago? You were smart to use small doses. Arsenic builds up slowly. It mimics fatigue. It mimics stress. You watched me get weaker every day and you told me I was just working too hard." Courtney shook her head frantically, tears finally streaming down her face, real tears of fear this time. "No, Terrence, please. It wasn't me. It was him. Hunter made me do it. He said he would leave me if I didn't help him get the money." The betrayal hit Hunter like a physical blow. He turned on her, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You lying witch!" he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at her. "You came to me. You said you were tired of waiting for the old man to die so you could get the inheritance. This was all your idea." Terrence laughed, a dry, humorless sound that chilled the room. "I don't care whose idea it was," he said. "I only care that you both signed the death certificate before I was even cold." Just then, the heavy double doors at the main entrance burst open with a resounding boom. The sound echoed off the vaulted ceiling, silencing the screaming crowd. 6 police officers in tactical gear marched in, their boots thudding rhythmically against the stone floor. Leading them was Detective Miller, a man I had played poker with for 20 years. I had called him the moment Terrence woke up in the safe house 3 days ago. "Nobody move!" Detective Miller bellowed, his voice amplified by the authority of the law. He marched straight down the center aisle, ignoring the bewildered guests. He stopped in front of Courtney. Without a word, he pulled a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. The metal glinted under the church lights, a stark contrast to the soft flowers and religious icons surrounding us. "Courtney Elizabeth Hayes," Detective Miller said, his tone flat and professional. "You are under arrest for the attempted murder of Terrence Hayes, conspiracy to commit fraud, and tampering with medical evidence." Courtney screamed as the cold metal snapped around her wrists. It was a primal, piercing shriek that made the hair on my arms stand up. She thrashed against the officers, her black dress tearing at the shoulder. "I am the victim here," she wailed, turning her wild eyes toward the congregation. "Look at them. They are crazy. My husband is supposed to be dead. This is a setup. Douglas planned this. He hates me because I am white. He has always hated me." I watched her struggle with a cold detachment. She was playing the race card, the victim card, every card she had left in her deck. But it was useless. We had the lab reports. We had the tainted shake bottle she thought she had thrown away. And we had the living, breathing proof of her crime standing right in front of her. "Take her away," Terrence said, turning his back on the woman he had once vowed to cherish until death. As the officers dragged Courtney out, her heels dragging across the floor she had walked down as a bride 6 years ago, the room felt lighter. One rat was in the cage. I turned my attention to the bigger one. Hunter was standing near a marble pillar, looking surprisingly calm given the circumstances. 2 officers were moving toward him, handcuffs ready. I felt a surge of satisfaction. This was the moment I had waited for. I wanted to see him in chains. I wanted to see his arrogance broken. But before the officers could lay a hand on him, a voice cut through the air. "Stop right there." A man in a sharp gray suit emerged from the side shadows of the church. He carried a leather briefcase and walked with the smug assurance of someone who charges $1,000 an hour. I recognized him immediately. It was Sterling Vance, the most expensive defense attorney in the state, a man known for getting serial killers off on technicalities. Detective Miller stopped, his hand hovering over his holster. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am Mr. Hunter's legal counsel," Vance said, stepping between the police and his client, "and you cannot arrest this man." "Watch me," Detective Miller growled. "We have witness testimony that he conspired to poison Terrence Hayes." Vance opened his briefcase and pulled out a document, waving it dismissively. "You have the testimony of a woman who is currently being arrested for the crime herself. Her word is inadmissible as she is a co-conspirator trying to cut a deal. Furthermore, my client has never purchased poison, never administered poison, and has no physical evidence linking him to the act. Being an adulterer is not a felony in the state of Georgia, detective, unless you have a warrant signed by a judge specifically naming my client with concrete physical evidence. You are engaging in unlawful harassment. I stepped forward, my blood boiling. He just confessed, I roared. We all heard him. He whispered it to the casket. He said he would spend the money. Vance turned to me, his eyes cold and dead behind rimless glasses. Hearsay, Mr. Hayes. A whisper in a loud room is not a confession. It is open to interpretation. Perhaps he said he would save the money. Without a recording, it is just the word of a grieving father against an upstanding businessman. Hunter straightened his jacket, his confidence returning in a rush. He smirked at Terrence, a look of pure, unadulterated evil. "See you around, buddy," he said. "Glad you are not dead. It would have been boring to spend your money without you watching." Terrence lunged forward. "I am going to kill him," he screamed, his hands reaching for Hunter's throat. I grabbed my son by the waist, using all my strength to hold him back. The police officers stepped in to block Terrence, not Hunter. It was a twisted irony that made me want to vomit. The law was protecting the villain because he knew how to play the game better than we did. "Let him go, Terrence," I shouted, struggling to hold my son back. "Not here. Not like this." Hunter and his lawyer turned and walked down the aisle. They moved slowly, deliberately, maximizing the insult. Hunter paused at the door, looking back at the chaos he had caused. He winked at me, a simple, casual wink that promised a war. As the heavy doors closed behind him, Terrence collapsed against me, his body shaking with rage and exhaustion. He looked at the empty space where his enemy had stood. "He got away, Dad," Terrence whispered, his voice cracking. "He poisoned me, he stole my wife, and he just walked out the front door." I gripped my son's shoulder, feeling the solid muscle beneath the suit jacket. I looked at the closed doors, my mind already racing, calculating, planning. "He didn't get away, son," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "He just bought himself a little more time. But time is the one thing he is running out of. We don't need the police to finish this. We are going to take him apart piece by piece. We are going to take his money, his reputation, and his freedom. And when we are done, he will wish he had stayed in this church and let them arrest him." The congregation began to murmur, the shock wearing off and the reality setting in. I looked at the stained glass window above the altar depicting the angel of justice with a sword. I tightened my grip on my cane. The sword was in our hands now, and we were going to swing it. The sun had barely risen over the Atlanta skyline when the nightmare started all over again. We had spent the night at a hotel because the police needed to process the scene at the church, and quite frankly, neither Terrence nor I wanted to go back to the mansion immediately. We thought we had won. We thought Courtney was sitting in a cold cell wearing an orange jumpsuit crying into a metal toilet. We were wrong. Money does not just talk in this country, it screams, and Hunter had clearly paid for the best legal megaphone money could buy. We pulled up to the main gate of the Hayes estate at 9 in the morning. My old bones were aching from the tension of the previous day, but my spirit was high. I was ready to help my son reclaim his life. But as we approached the driveway, I saw a black sedan parked just inside the perimeter. It was not a police car. It was a Mercedes, sleek and expensive, the kind of car that Sterling Vance drove. Terrence frowned and rolled down the window. The gate, a massive structure of wrought iron and gold leaf that I had paid for 10 years ago, remained firmly shut. Usually the sensors would recognize our car tags and swing open. Today, the light on the control panel blinked a stubborn, angry red. Then I saw her. Courtney walked out of the front door of the mansion. She was not wearing the torn black dress from the funeral. She was wearing a white silk power suit, looking like she was about to host a charity luncheon rather than facing charges for attempted murder. She held a cup of coffee in one hand and a cell phone in the other. She walked down the driveway with a casual, confident stride that made my blood boil. Behind her, 2 private security guards in dark uniforms took up positions on either side of the gate. She stopped 10 feet from the iron bars, took a sip of her coffee, and smiled. It was the smile of a woman who had just realized she held a royal flush while everyone else was playing with Uno cards. "Open the gate, Courtney," Terrence yelled, leaning out of the window. "The game is over. The police know everything." Courtney just laughed. It was a light tinkling sound that grated on my nerves like sandpaper. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "The game has barely started. You really should have checked with your lawyer before you decided to come trespassing on private property." Trespassing, Terrence shouted, his face turning purple. This is my house. I bought it. I paid for every brick. Courtney shook her head slowly, looking at him like he was a slow child. You really don't get it, do you? According to the state of Georgia, Terrence Hayes died 3 days ago. I have the death certificate right here in the safe. It is signed, notarized, and filed. She gestured vaguely toward the house. Until a judge overturns that ruling, which could take months given the backlog in the courts, you are legally a corpse, and dead men do not own property. Dead men do not have bank accounts, and dead men certainly do not tell the executor of their estate who she can and cannot let onto the property. I sat in the passenger seat, stunned by the sheer audacity of it. She was using his own fake death against him. It was a loophole the size of the Grand Canyon, and she had driven a truck right through it. You are out on bail, I growled, speaking for the first time. You are a suspect in an attempted murder investigation. You think a piece of paper is going to protect you. Courtney looked at me with cold, dead eyes. In the eyes of the law, I am a grieving widow who is being harassed by her husband's delusional father and an imposter claiming to be her dead husband. My lawyer filed an emergency injunction this morning. Since Terrence is legally dead, I am the sole owner of this estate, and I am exercising my right to deny entry to unwanted guests. Now, turn that car around before I have my security team remove you for harassment. She turned her back on us and started walking back toward the house, swaying her hips. The security guards crossed their arms, looking at us with smug expressions. They were hired muscle, paid for with my son's money to keep my son out of his own home. Terrence slammed his hands against the steering wheel. She is right, Dad, he said, his voice breaking. The lawyer told me this might happen. The bureaucratic process to reverse a death certificate is a nightmare. She could tie this up in probate court for a year. By the time I get back in there, she will have sold everything that isn't nailed down. He put the car in reverse, defeated. I am sorry, Dad, he whispered. I guess we have to go back to the hotel. I looked at my son. I saw the despair in his eyes. He had been poisoned, betrayed, and humiliated. And now, he was being defeated by a piece of paper. I looked at the gate. It was tall. It was strong. It was designed to keep criminals out. But today, it was keeping the criminals in. Stop the car, I said. Terrence looked at me. What? I said, stop the car. Get out. Dad, what are you doing? He asked, but he did as I said. I opened the door and stepped out into the humid Atlanta air. I walked around to the driver's side. I did not look at the security guards. I did not look at Courtney, who had stopped halfway up the driveway to watch. My eyes were fixed on the garage across the street, where we kept the overflow vehicles. Parked in the driveway of the guest cottage was my 1995 Ford F-250. It was a beast of a truck, solid steel, rusted in places, but with an engine that could pull a house down. I used it for fishing trips and hauling lumber. It didn't have backup cameras, it didn't have heated seats, and it certainly didn't have sensors that cared about electronic locks. I walked over to the truck. I kept a spare key in the magnetic box under the wheel well. I found it, unlocked the door, and climbed into the cab. The smell of old leather and stale tobacco hit me. It smelled like work. It smelled like the days when I built this empire with my bare hands, before lawyers and loopholes complicated everything. Terrence ran over to the window. Dad, you can't be serious. That gate cost $50,000. The police will arrest you for destruction of property. I turned the key. The engine roared to life with a thunderous growl, spewing a cloud of dark smoke. I looked down at my son. Technically, I said, revving the engine until the truck shook. This is my truck. And technically, that gate belongs to a dead man who can't complain. I shifted the gear into drive. I looked through the windshield at the ornate iron barrier. I saw the security guard's eyes go wide. I saw Courtney turn around, her coffee cup slipping from her hand. Stand back, I yelled. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal. The tires screeched against the asphalt, smoking as they found traction. The old Ford lunged forward like a bull seeing red. I didn't aim for the lock. I aimed for the center hinges. The distance closed in seconds. 50 feet, 30 feet, 10 feet. The impact was glorious. There was a sound like a bomb going off as 3 tons of American steel collided with Italian iron. Metal screamed as it was twisted and torn from the stone pillars. The airbag didn't deploy because I had disabled it years ago. The jolt snapped my head back, but my grip on the wheel never wavered. The gate buckled, groaned, and then crashed inward with a deafening clang. I didn't stop. I drove right over the flattened wreckage, the truck bouncing violently as the tires crunched over the gilded metal. I kept going until I was halfway up the driveway, right in front of where Courtney was standing. I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded to a halt, dust swirling around it. I kicked the door open and stepped out. The front bumper was crumpled and steam was hissing from the radiator, but I stood tall. The security guards were cowering by the hedges. Courtney was frozen, her white suit now splattered with mud from the tires. She looked at the destroyed gate, then at me, her mouth opening and closing like a goldfish. "You can't do that!" she shrieked, her voice an octave higher than before. "That is illegal. I will call the sheriff. I will sue you for every penny you have." I walked up to her, ignoring the ringing in my ears. I leaned in close, so close I could smell the expensive coffee she had spilled on her shoes. "You want to talk about the law, Courtney," I said, my voice low and steady. "You think a piece of paper makes you the boss. You forgot one thing. I built this house. I poured the foundation. And I paid for that gate." I pointed a finger at her chest. "The law is on paper," I said. "But this is my land, and this is my law. Now get out of my way before I decide to renovate the porch with my truck too." Courtney looked at the truck, then at the fury in my eyes. She realized in that moment that no injunction in the world could stop a father who had nothing left to lose. She stepped aside, and for the first time in 24 hours, the front door to our home was open. For the next 3 days, our mansion turned into a war zone defined by invisible lines and petty cruelties. Courtney had claimed the master suite and the entire second floor as her sovereign territory, while Terrence and I were relegated to the guest quarters on the ground level. It was a ridiculous and humiliating stalemate. We were prisoners in a home that my sweat and blood had built. The air in the hallways was thick with a silence so heavy it felt like it could crush your lungs. We avoided the staircase like it was a minefield. Every time the floorboards creaked above our heads, Terrence would look up with a mixture of fear and rage that no son should ever have to feel. He was jumping at shadows. The poison she had fed him had left his body weak, but the betrayal had left his mind shattered. The guerrilla warfare started on the second morning. I went to the kitchen to make coffee, only to find the breaker box locked and the power to the downstairs outlets cut. Courtney had flipped the switch from the main panel in the master bedroom closet. She was trying to freeze us out. She was trying to starve us out. She had ordered grocery deliveries that the security guards brought straight to her window, while we were left eating canned beans from the pantry like refugees. I sat at the granite island in the dark eating cold beans with a plastic spoon, and I just laughed. It was a dry, bitter laugh. She thought cutting the hot water and the lights would break me. She forgot that I grew up in a shack in Alabama where running water was a luxury and the wind blew through the cracks in the walls. She forgot that I built my empire sleeping in the cab of a truck for 5 years. She was trying to break a man who had been forged in fire with a little bit of cold. But Terrence was different. He had grown up with silver spoons and soft sheets. The indignity was eating him alive. He paced the living room floor for hours, his footsteps wearing a path in the rug. He wanted to kick down her door. He wanted to scream. I had to hold him back every hour. I had to remind him that any act of aggression would play right into her hands. She was waiting for him to snap. She was recording every sound. She wanted him to prove that he was unstable. I told him to be patient. I told him that we were playing the long game. But I did not know that the game was about to change. I did not know that they were done playing with electricity and food. They were about to target the only thing that Terrence loved more than his life. It happened on Tuesday afternoon. The sun was trying to break through the gray clouds when a black SUV pulled up to the front of the house. It was not the police this time. It was a government vehicle. My stomach dropped. I knew that look. I knew that bureaucratic walk. Hunter stepped out of the passenger side. He was smiling. He opened the back door and a woman in a beige suit stepped out holding a clipboard. She looked tired and overworked, the face of a system that destroys families with paperwork. Behind her walked 2 uniformed officers. Terrence was playing with Leo in the front yard. It was the first time in days I had seen my grandson smile. They were kicking a soccer ball back and forth, trying to pretend that their world was not falling apart. When Terrence saw Hunter, his smile vanished. He scooped Leo up into his arms, holding him tight against his chest. I walked out onto the porch, my cane tapping a warning rhythm on the wood. "What is this, Hunter?" I asked, my voice low. Hunter did not answer. He just pointed at the woman. Mr. Hayes, she said, looking at Terrence. Not me. I am Sarah Jenkins from Child Protective Services. We received an emergency report regarding the welfare of Leo Hayes. What report? Terrence asked, his voice trembling. He squeezed Leo so hard the boy squirmed. We have reports of a violent domestic environment, the woman said, looking down at her clipboard. We have reports of destruction of property, specifically a gate being rammed by a vehicle. We have reports of shouting and threats. And given your current legal status as deceased Mr. Hayes, you have no custodial rights. Until paternity and guardianship can be established by a family court judge, the state is taking temporary custody of the minor. No, Terrence screamed. He stepped back, stumbling over the soccer ball. You are not taking my son. He is safe. I am his father. Hunter stepped forward. He looked sad. He looked like a concerned uncle. It is for his own good, Terrence. You are unstable. You crashed a truck into the gate. You are living in a house with no electricity. Look at you. You are shaking. You are scaring the boy. Leo began to cry. He buried his face in Terrence's neck, screaming, Daddy, make them go away. The officer stepped forward. Mr. Hayes, please hand over the child, the woman said, her voice cold and detached. Do not make this traumatic. If you resist, we will have to use force. I stepped between them. You cannot do this, I said. This is a setup. That man is the one who poisoned my son. He is the danger. The woman looked at me with pity. We are investigating all claims, sir. But right now the court order is clear. The child goes with us. Terrence looked at me, his eyes pleading for a miracle. Dad, do something. But there was nothing I could do. If I raised my cane, they would arrest me. If Terrence fought back, they would put him in a psych ward. We were trapped in a web of laws that were designed to protect the innocent but were being used to destroy them. Give him to me, son, I whispered, my heart breaking. Do not let them hurt him. We will get him back. I promise. Terrence sobbed. A deep guttural sound of pure agony. He kissed Leo on the forehead. He whispered something in the boy's ear. Then with hands that shook violently, he handed his whole world over to the woman in the beige suit. Leo screamed. He reached out his little hands, grabbing at the air. Daddy! Grandpa! No! No! They buckled him into the back of the government car. The sound of the door slamming shut was louder than a gunshot. Terrence fell to his knees in the dirt, grasping the grass as if he wanted to tear the earth apart. The officers got into their car, the woman got into hers, but Hunter did not leave immediately. He stood by the open door of his SUV, watching my son break. He lit a cigarette, the flame flaring up for a second before he snapped the lighter shut. I walked up to him. I was close enough to see the pores on his face. I was close enough to snap his neck before the police could stop me. Why, I asked. My voice was dead. Why are you doing this? You have the money. You have the house. Why take the boy? This is not business. This is cruelty. Hunter took a long drag of his cigarette and blew the smoke into my face. He looked at Terrence, sobbing on the ground, then he looked back at me. His eyes were not the eyes of a greedy lover anymore. They were the eyes of a man who had been carrying a hate so deep it had rotted his soul. You really don't remember, do you, Douglas? He whispered. Remember what I asked 20 years ago, Hunter said, his voice dropping to a hiss. A small trucking company in Birmingham. Jameson Logistics. Does that ring a bell? I frowned. The name was faint, a ghost from a past life. I bought a dozen small companies back then. It was just business. It was my father's business, Hunter said, and his face twisted with a sudden violent emotion. You didn't just buy it. You crushed it. You leveraged his debt. You forced him to sell for pennies on the dollar. You walked into his office in your expensive suit, and you told him it was just the market correcting itself. He took a step closer, his nose almost touching mine. My father went home that night and put a shotgun in his mouth. I was 15 years old. I found him. I stood frozen. The memory came rushing back. A rainy Tuesday in Birmingham. A desperate man begging for a loan extension. I had said no. I had taken the trucks. I had never thought about him again. This isn't about Courtney, Hunter said, flicking his cigarette onto my driveway. And it isn't about the money. The money is just a bonus. This is about watching you lose everything, Douglas. I want you to feel what I felt. I want you to watch your legacy die. I want you to watch your son break. And then when you have nothing left, I want you to know that the Jameson boy was the one who took it all." He laughed, a soft, chilling sound. "Enjoy the silence, old man. It is going to get a lot quieter around here." He got into his car and drove away, following the vehicle that carried my grandson. I stood there on the driveway while the realization washed over me like ice water. This was not a robbery. This was an execution. And for the first time in my life, I realized that I was not fighting a criminal. I was fighting a ghost I had created 20 years ago. The silence that followed the abduction of my grandson was heavier than any coffin lid. It settled into the corners of the empty mansion and suffocated the air until it was hard to breathe. Terrence sat on the floor of the living room, surrounded by the shadows of the late afternoon. He was staring at the spot where the social worker had stood, but his eyes were seeing nothing but darkness. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. I walked over to the window and watched the dust settle on the driveway where the government car had disappeared. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so cold it burned. We had played by the rules. We had gathered evidence. We had trusted the system. And the system had just walked in and stolen the only innocent thing left in this war. "This is your fault." The voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a knife. I turned around. Terrence had not moved, but he was looking at me now. His eyes were red and rimmed with a hatred I had never seen directed at me before. "Excuse me, son," I said, keeping my voice level. "I said this is your fault," Terrence said louder this time, pushing himself up from the floor. "You came up with this plan. You told me to fake my death. You told me to play dead so we could catch them." He took a step toward me, his hands balled into fists. "If I hadn't listened to you, I would still be legally alive. I would still have rights. They couldn't have taken him if I wasn't a ghost on a piece of paper. You did this. You and your obsession with revenge. You used me as bait, and now my son is gone." He was screaming now, the veins in his neck bulging. He picked up a crystal vase from the table and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, exploding into 1,000 glittering shards that rained down like broken promises. "You killed me, Dad," he yelled, tears streaming down his face. "You didn't save me. You killed me. And now you have lost Leo, too." He lunged at me, grabbing the lapels of my jacket. He was shaking me, desperate to hurt someone, desperate to make the pain stop. I looked into his eyes and saw a boy who was drowning. He was panicking, and if I didn't stop him, he was going to pull us both under. I did the hardest thing a father ever has to do. I pulled my arm back and I slapped him. The sound of my hand striking his cheek was sharp and loud, echoing in the empty house. It wasn't a blow of anger, it was a blow of necessity. It was the shock needed to restart a heart that had stopped beating. Terrence stumbled back, his hand flying to his face. He looked at me with shock, the madness momentarily cleared from his eyes. I stepped forward, invading his space, forcing him to look at me. "You listen to me, and you listen good," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Courtney poisoned you. Hunter stole from you. They were killing you slowly while you slept in your bed. I didn't kill you, Terrence. I woke you up." I grabbed his shoulders, gripping him hard enough to bruise. "They took the boy to break you, that is the plan. They want you to crumble, they want you to turn on me, they want you to sit here and cry and drink yourself to death so they can win without firing another shot. Are you going to let them win? Are you going to let that man raise your son?" Terrence stared at me, his chest heaving. The tears were still falling, but the fire was coming back into his eyes. "No," he whispered. "Then stand up," I commanded. "Wipe your face. We are done playing defense. We are going to find the proof we need, and we are going to bury them." Terrence took a deep breath. He wiped his face with his sleeve. He nodded slowly. "Where do we start?" he asked, his voice steadying. I picked up my cane and walked to the door. "We start with the only person Courtney hates almost as much as us. The maid she fired last week. We drove the old Ford truck across the city, leaving the manicured lawns of the north side behind. The scenery changed from gated communities to strip malls and finally to the crumbling apartment blocks of the south side. This was where the people who cleaned the mansions lived. This was where the invisible workforce of Atlanta went when the sun went down. Mrs. Hattie lived on the third floor of a building that smelled of boiled cabbage and damp plaster. She was a woman of 60 with hands that were twisted from years of scrubbing other people's floors. When she opened the door and saw us, she tried to slam it shut. She was terrified. In her eyes, we were trouble. We were rich men bringing bad news. Mrs. Hattie. "Please," Terrence said, putting his hand on the door. "We just want to talk. We need your help." She looked at Terrence's face, seeing the desperation there. She had raised 3 boys of her own. She knew the look of a father in pain. She sighed and opened the door wide enough for us to enter. "I don't want no trouble, Mr. Hayes," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "That woman told me if I ever spoke to you, she would call the police and tell them I stole silver." "She won't call anyone," I said, sitting down on her plastic-covered sofa. "She is too busy trying to stay out of jail." We sat in her small living room under the gaze of a velvet painting of Jesus. I got straight to the point. "We know she was poisoning him, Mrs. Hattie. We found the arsenic in his blood. But we need the bottle. We need to know where she got it and where she put it." Hattie shook her head nervously. "I never saw no poison. I just cooked the meals she told me to cook." "Think Hattie," Terrence urged, leaning forward. "Did she have a special ingredient? Something she added herself? A vitamin? A supplement? Something she didn't let you touch?" Hattie frowned, her brow furrowing in concentration. She plucked at the hem of her apron. "There was the wellness powder," she said slowly. "She got it from Mexico. Said it was for his energy. She kept it in a little brown glass jar in the back of the pantry. She yelled at me once when I moved it to wipe the shelf. Said it was very expensive and very delicate." "That's it," Terrence said, his eyes widening. "That has to be it. Where is the jar, Hattie? Is it still in the house?" Hattie shook her head. "No. About 2 days before Mr. Terrence got sick and went to the hospital, she made me clean out the pantry. She told me to throw everything out that was open. She threw that jar in the trash herself. She double-bagged it." My heart sank. The trash. That was weeks ago. "Who collects the trash at the estate?" I asked. "The city truck comes on Mondays," Hattie said. "But that week they were on strike, so the private service came on Wednesday." Wednesday. That was the day before Terrence collapsed. "Which bags?" I asked, standing up. "What did the bags look like?" "They were the yellow lemon-scented ones," Hattie said. "She only buys the yellow ones because she says the black ones look ugly on the curb. She made me tie them with blue ribbon to separate the recyclables." I looked at Terrence. We had a lead. It was a slim, dirty, disgusting lead, but it was all we had. "Thank you, Mrs. Hattie," I said, placing a roll of $100 bills on her coffee table. "If anyone asks, you never saw us." We left the apartment and got back into the truck. The sun was setting, painting the sky in colors of bruised purple and red. "Where are we going?" Terrence asked, starting the engine. I pointed toward the industrial district, where the smokestacks churned gray smoke into the air. "We are going to the landfill, son. We are going digging. The Atlanta Municipal Landfill is a place where hope goes to die. It is a mountain range of waste stretching for acres under a sky filled with screaming seagulls. The smell hits you a mile before you see the gate. It is a thick, cloying stench of rotting food, decomposing plastic, and methane gas. It sticks to your clothes and coats your tongue. It was night by the time we bribed the night watchman to let us in. $500 bought us 10 minutes with the intake logs, and another $500 bought us directions to Sector 4, where the private collection trucks had dumped their load 3 weeks ago. We parked the truck near a massive mound of debris that towered over us like a garbage volcano. I turned on the high beams, bathing the trash in harsh white light. We put on heavy work gloves and tied bandanas around our faces, but nothing could filter out the smell. "Look for yellow bags," I shouted over the wind. Yellow bags with blue ribbons. We began to climb. It was a nightmare made real. My Italian leather shoes sank into slime that I didn't want to identify. I slipped and slid on old tires and wet cardboard. Beside me, Terrence was tearing at the pile with the ferocity of a madman. He was throwing bags aside, ripping them open, kicking through piles of dirty diapers and coffee grounds. This was the reality of our war. We were billionaires standing on top of a mountain of filth looking for a needle in a haystack. But we didn't stop. My back screamed in protest. My lungs burned. But every time I thought about stopping, I saw the face of Hunter blowing smoke at me. I saw Courtney smiling at the funeral. And I kept digging. An hour passed. Then 2. We were exhausted, covered in grime, our expensive suits ruined beyond repair. Rats scurried away from our lights, their eyes glowing red in the darkness. Dad Terrence called out, his voice hoarse. "Over here." I scrambled over a pile of broken drywall to where he was standing. He had uncovered a pocket of trash that had been buried under a mattress. There, sticking out from under a pile of pizza boxes, was a shred of yellow plastic. We dug frantically, pulling away the debris. It was a yellow lemon-scented bag, and around the neck was a frayed piece of blue ribbon. Terrence ripped the bag open. The smell of rotten fruit wafted out. He dumped the contents onto the ground. Old salad, empty wine bottles, and there at the bottom, rolling out onto a piece of newspaper, was a small, brown glass jar. Terrence picked it up with shaking hands. He held it up to the truck's headlights. The label was peeled off, but there was a residue of white powder clinging to the inside of the glass. "Is this it?" he whispered. I took the jar from him. I unscrewed the cap and sniffed carefully. Beneath the smell of the landfill, there was a faint metallic scent. Bitter almonds. "We got them," I said, my voice trembling with relief. "We got them." Terrence fell to his knees in the trash. He wasn't praying. He was laughing. He laughed until he cried tears, leaving clean tracks through the dirt on his face. We climbed down from the mountain of garbage, holding that dirty glass jar like it was the Holy Grail. We sat on the tailgate of the truck, breathing hard, watching the sun begin to rise over the city. We smelled terrible. We looked like beggars. But as I looked at my son, I saw the strength returning to his shoulders. "Let's go home," I said. "We have a delivery to make to the lab, and then we have a bank to visit." Terrence looked at me, a fierce smile cutting through the grime on his face. "No, Dad," he said. "First we go to the lab, then we go to war. They took my son. I am going to take their money, every single cent." We sat in the cab of my battered truck with the engine idling and the air conditioner struggling to fight the smell of the landfill that clung to our clothes. Terrence had his laptop open on his knees, and the blue light of the screen illuminated the dirt streaks on his face. He was tapping the keys with a ferocity I had never seen before. His fingers were moving faster than his thoughts. He wasn't just my son in that moment. He was a weapon. "Look at this, Dad!" he said, his voice tight with panic. "Look at the screen." I leaned over. I saw rows of numbers scrolling past like a waterfall. Red numbers, negative numbers. "He is not just taking the cash," Terrence said. "He is liquidating the assets. He sold the entire logistics fleet in Savannah 10 minutes ago. He sold the warehouse in Decatur 5 minutes ago. He is selling everything for pennies on the dollar just to turn it into liquid cash." "Where is it going?" I asked, watching the numbers vanish. "It is bouncing through shell companies," Terrence said, pointing at the complex web of transfers. "First, it goes to a holding company in Delaware. Then it jumps to an account in Switzerland. And finally, it lands here." He pointed to a final destination code. "The Cayman Islands," I said, recognizing the banking code immediately. "The black hole of finance. Once it touches that island, we will never see it again." "We have maybe an hour," Terrence said, slamming the laptop shut. "He is draining the corporate operating accounts now. If he empties those, payroll will bounce on Friday. 2,000 employees will go without checks. The company will implode by Monday morning." "Drive," I said. "Where?" Terrence asked. "First National Bank," I replied. "The main branch downtown. We are going to stop the bleeding at the source." We drove into the heart of Atlanta as the morning commuters filled the streets. We looked like nightmares. Our suits were ruined. We smelled of rotten garbage and sulfur. But we walked into the marble lobby of First National Bank like we owned the building. The security guard stepped forward, his hand resting on his taser, but I shot him a look that froze him in his tracks. It was the look of a man who had nothing left to lose. We marched straight to the glass office at the back. Mr. Henderson, the branch manager, was sitting behind his mahogany desk sipping an espresso. He was a young white man with a haircut that cost more than my first car. He looked up as we entered, and his nose wrinkled in disgust. "Mr. Hayes," he said, standing up but not offering his hand, "you can't be in here. You are disturbing the clients. And frankly, you smell terrible. Freeze the accounts," I said, slamming my cane down on his desk. "Freeze the Hayes Logistics operating accounts. Freeze the personal accounts. Freeze everything connected to Hunter or Courtney." Henderson laughed nervously, wiping a speck of dirt from his desk with a tissue. "I can't do that, Douglas," he said, using my first name with a condescension that made my teeth ache. "You retired 5 years ago. You are not a signatory on the corporate accounts anymore. And as for the personal accounts, those belong to Terrence." "I am Terrence," Terrence shouted, stepping forward. I am right here. I am telling you to freeze my money. Henderson looked at Terrence with a pitying smile. Mr. Hayes, please. We all know the tragic news. Terrence Hayes is deceased. I have the death certificate on file. I cannot take orders from a dead man, even if he looks remarkably like the living one. The accounts are currently under the stewardship of the executor, Mrs. Courtney Hayes, and she has authorized these transfers. She is stealing it, Terrence yelled. She is laundering it to the Caymans. Can't you see the activity? I see a grieving widow consolidating assets, Henderson said coldly. Now please leave before I call the police. You are making a scene. I looked at Henderson. I saw the way he looked at us. He didn't see the founders of the biggest black-owned logistics company in the South. He saw two dirty, desperate men who didn't belong in his clean world. He was hiding behind policy, but the truth was written in his eyes. He didn't respect us. He never had. I pulled out my phone. It was an old model, cracked screen, and dirty, but it still worked. You have 3 minutes, Henderson, I said quietly. Henderson sat back down, crossing his arms. Or what, Douglas? You will write a bad review. I dialed the first number. Hello, Clarence, I said into the phone. Yes, it is Douglas. I am standing in First National Bank. Yes, the one downtown. I need you to do me a favor. Pull your construction accounts. All of them. Yes, right now. Tell them you don't trust the management. I hung up and dialed the next number. Morning, Arthur. It is Douglas. How is the restaurant chain doing? Good. Listen, I need you to close your business accounts at First National. Yes, today. Immediate withdrawal. The manager here seems to think black money isn't worth protecting. Henderson's smile faltered. He straightened his tie. Who are you calling? He asked, his voice losing some of its confident edge. I ignored him. I dialed again. Pastor Williams, it is Douglas Hayes. How is the mega church building fund coming along? 20 million, is it? Well, you might want to move that to a different bank. First National is having some liquidity issues today. I looked at Henderson. The phone on his desk began to ring. Then the phone of his assistant outside the glass wall began to ring. Then the phone of the head teller began to ring. It was a symphony of alarms. Henderson grabbed his desk phone. First National, this is... Excuse me, Mr. Dubois. Why would you... No, please, let's not be rash. We value your business. Wait. He slammed the phone down. It rang again immediately. Yes, Mrs. Walker, I understand, but millions in cash. We can't... Please don't close the salon franchise accounts. I stood there leaning on my cane, watching the color drain from his face. He looked at me with horror. What did you do? He whispered. I leaned in close. You thought I was just a retired old man, I said. You forgot that I built this city's economy before you were born. I sat on boards with these men. I loaned them money when banks like yours slammed the door in their faces. We are not just a community, Henderson. We are an economy. And if I say we leave together. The phone rang again. Henderson didn't answer it. He looked at his computer screen. $50 million in withdrawal requests in 2 minutes, he said, his voice shaking. You will crash the branch. Then freeze the Hayes accounts, I said. Stop the transfers to the Cayman Islands. Flag them for fraud. Do it now and I might tell my friends to put the phone down. Henderson looked at the ringing phone, then at me. He typed furiously on his keyboard, his hands trembling. I am flagging the transactions, he said, typing as fast as he could. I am putting a fraud lock on the SWIFT transfer. The money is frozen. It is stuck in the intermediary bank in New York. Hunter can't touch it. Show me, Terrence said, walking around the desk. Henderson turned the monitor. A big red banner reading "Account Frozen" flashed across the screen. The waterfall of numbers had stopped. I picked up my phone one last time. Thank you, gentlemen. The issue has been resolved. You can keep your money where it is for now, but keep a close eye on it. I hung up. The phones in the bank stopped ringing. The silence that followed was heavy and sweet. I looked at Henderson, who was slumped in his chair, sweating through his expensive suit. You might want to take a shower, Henderson, I said, turning to leave. You smell like fear. And personally, I prefer the smell of the landfill. We walked out of the bank into the bright Atlanta sunshine. Terrence looked at me, and for the first time in days, he looked like he could breathe again. We had stopped the money. We had found the poison. We were winning. But as I looked at my phone, I knew the war wasn't over. Hunter was cornered now. and a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind of all. The glow of the television screen in our office was the only light in the room as the sun began to set over Atlanta. We were watching the dismantling of our lives in high definition. Courtney sat on the plush beige sofa of the country's most popular daytime talk show. She was wearing a soft pastel cardigan and her hair was pulled back in a modest ponytail. She looked innocent. She looked fragile. She looked like America's sweetheart. The host leaned in with a practiced expression of concern and asked Courtney to describe the terror she had been living with. Courtney dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Her performance was flawless. "It has been a nightmare," she whispered, her voice trembling just enough to break hearts across the nation. "I fell in love with Terrence because I thought he was different. But the moment I entered that family, I realized I was an outsider. Douglas Hayes never accepted me. He made comments about my background. He made me feel like I was stealing his son's heritage just by existing. I watched Terrence sitting beside me at the conference table. His face was buried in his hands. He was listening to the woman he had loved for 6 years rewrite their history into a horror story." And then she continued, looking directly into the camera. "When Terrence got sick, I tried to help him. I tried to get him help. But his father convinced him that I was the enemy. They became paranoid. They started accusing me of horrible things. And then came the violence. Douglas crashed his truck into the gate of my home. He threatened me. I am terrified for my life. I am just a woman trying to survive against 2 powerful men who think they are above the law." The audience gasped. The host shook her head in disgust. "We are with you, Courtney," the host said, patting her hand. "You are brave for speaking out." I clicked the remote, turning the television off. The silence that followed was worse than the lies. She had played the ultimate card. She had painted herself as the victim of racial prejudice and toxic masculinity. She had turned the narrative so completely that the truth didn't matter anymore. To the world, we were not the victims of poisoning and theft. We were the monsters. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. It started with a phone call from our chief financial officer, Mr. Hayes. He said, his voice panic-stricken. "The stock is in free fall. We have lost 12% in the last hour. The institutional investors are pulling out. They are citing the morality clause in our bylaws. They say they cannot be associated with a leadership team accused of domestic terrorism and racism." I looked out the window of our headquarters. Down on the street below, a crowd was beginning to gather. It started with a few people holding signs, but within an hour it had swelled to a mob. They were chanting justice for Courtney. They were throwing eggs and tomatoes at the glass doors of the lobby. Then came the bricks. A loud crash echoed through the building as a brick shattered one of the lower windows. The sound of breaking glass was the signal for chaos. The crowd cheered. I saw someone spray painting the words "abusers" on the marble columns of the entrance. Terrence opened his laptop. "Don't look at it," I warned him, but he didn't listen. He opened social media. "They are doxing us, Dad," he said, his voice hollow. "They posted our home address. They posted your cell phone number. Look at these comments." He turned the screen toward me. It was a river of hate. People were calling for us to be arrested. People were threatening to burn the building down. There were death threats against me, against Terrence, and even against anyone who defended us. The internet had become a lynch mob and Courtney was holding the rope. "We are losing everything," Terrence whispered. "The company, the reputation, the community. They all believe her. Why wouldn't they? She is the crying widow and we are the angry men who crashed a truck." I stood up and walked to the window. I looked down at the angry faces. They were good people mostly. They were people who thought they were fighting for justice. They were being manipulated by a master storyteller. "Courtney wants a show," I said, watching the news vans pull up to the curb. "She wants to be the star. She wants the world to watch." I turned back to Terrence. "So let's give them a show." I picked up the internal phone and dialed the building manager. "Frank," I said, "I want you to go to the warehouse. Get the jumbo LED screens we used for the annual gala, the massive ones." Frank stammered on the other end of the line. "Mr. Hayes, there is a riot outside. You want me to set up screens. They will throw rocks at them. Build a cage around them," I ordered. "Put them on the roof of the portico right above the main entrance. I want them facing the street. I want them loud enough to be heard 3 blocks away. And Frank, I want them live in 1 hour." Terrence looked at me confused. "Dad, what are you doing? Are you going to make a statement? Are you going to apologize?" I am not apologizing for anything I said buttoning my jacket. An apology implies guilt. We are not guilty, we are just unheard. For the next hour, we watched as the maintenance crew struggled to erect the massive screen structure above the chaos. The crowd below jeered and threw debris, but the workers were protected by the height. The media cameras turned their lenses upward. The reporters began to speculate. Was Douglas Hayes resigning? Was he surrendering? Was he going to confess? The suspense was palpable. The crowd grew larger, fed by curiosity. Everyone wanted to see the fall of the Hayes empire. They wanted to see the old lion bow his head. By 6 o'clock, the sun had set and the street was illuminated by the flashing lights of police cars and the glow of the news vans. The massive screen flickered to life. It was a black square towering over the street, a monolith of darkness. I sat at my desk and connected my phone to the broadcast system. My hand hovered over the play button. Courtney thinks she controls the narrative because she went on television, I said to Terrence. She forgot that I own the building. She forgot that the truth doesn't need a talk show host, it just needs to be seen. I looked down at the street one last time. The chanting had stopped. Thousands of eyes were looking up, waiting. The silence was heavy with anticipation. They were expecting a speech. They were expecting a plea for mercy. I looked at Terrence. Are you ready to show them the real movie, son? Terrence nodded, his face setting into a hard line. Play it, Dad. Burn them down. I pressed the button. On the street below, the massive screen turned from black to a grainy gray. The sound of static crackled through the concert speakers booming off the surrounding skyscrapers. Then a voice cut through the night air. It wasn't my voice, and it wasn't Terrence's voice. It was the voice of a woman laughing. The crowd below went silent. They recognized that laugh. It was the same woman they had just seen crying on national television. But she wasn't crying now. The video came into focus. It was a recording from inside a bedroom. The angle was low, hidden on a bookshelf, but the picture was clear. Courtney was sitting on the edge of the bed. She was holding a bottle of wine. And sitting next to her with his arm around her waist was Hunter. The crowd gasped. The image was undeniable, but it was the audio that would end her. The video played on. Hunter poured a glass of wine and handed it to her. Did you put it in the shake? Hunter asked, his voice booming across downtown Atlanta. Courtney took a sip and smiled. A cruel, cold smile. 2 milligrams, she said. Just like we planned. He drank the whole thing. He thinks it is a new supplement for his gym routine. The idiot thanked me for it. Hunter laughed and kissed her neck. How much longer, he asked. Courtney checked her watch in the video. The doctor said his liver is failing, she said. Maybe another week. Once he is paralyzed, I will get power of attorney. I will sign the company over to the Shell Corp, and then we can pull the plug. The video paused on her face, her smiling, calculating face. Below in the street, there was no chanting. There was no throwing of bricks. There was a collective intake of breath. The reporters were frantically talking into their microphones. The people who had held signs calling me a monster lowered them slowly. I leaned into the microphone in my office, my voice amplified to the thousands below. You wanted a story, I said, my voice rolling like thunder. You wanted the truth about the Hayes family. I let the video play again. He is an idiot, Courtney said on the giant screen. He trusts me. He actually thinks I love him. I looked at Terrence. He was crying, but they were tears of relief. The burden of proof had just been lifted. The court of public opinion had just adjourned, and the verdict was written on the faces of the stunned mob below. Courtney was watching this, I knew. Somewhere in that stolen mansion, she was watching her victimhood evaporate into thin air. She had used the media to destroy us. And now the media was broadcasting her confession to the world. The war wasn't over, but the battle for the truth had just been won. The giant LED screen hanging from the side of the Hayes Logistics building flickered to life, casting a blue glow over the angry mob below. They had come here to destroy us. They had come with bricks and spray paint, believing the lies of a woman who played the victim on national television. But now they were staring up at a 50-foot-high image of the truth. The audio system crackled for a second, and then the sound of Courtney's voice boomed through the streets of downtown Atlanta, echoing off the skyscrapers like the voice of doom. The video was grainy but unmistakable. It showed the master bedroom of my son's house. Courtney was sitting on the edge of the bed wearing a silk robe and holding a glass of wine. Sitting next to her with his arm draped casually over her shoulder was Hunter. He looked relaxed. He looked like a man who had already won. The crowd on the street below stopped chanting. The signs demanding justice were lowered slowly as thousands of eyes fixed on the screen. On the video, Hunter took a sip of wine and laughed. Did he drink the shake, he asked. His voice was clear and sharp, cutting through the humid night air. Courtney smiled, a cold, reptilian smile that made the blood freeze in my veins even though I had seen it before. Every drop, she said. I put 2 milligrams in just like we planned. He thinks it is a new protein supplement for his gym routine. The idiot actually thanked me for it. A collective gasp rose from the street. It sounded like the air being sucked out of the city. The reporters who had been broadcasting live updates about the evil Hayes family suddenly stopped talking. They turned their cameras away from the building and pointed them at the screen. The video continued. Hunter kissed Courtney on the cheek. "How long until the paralysis sets in?" he asked. Courtney checked her watch on the screen. "The doctor said his liver is already failing," she replied, taking another sip of wine. "Maybe another week. Once he is paralyzed and can't speak, I will get power of attorney. I will sign the company over to the Shell Corporation, and then we can pull the plug. We will be rich, Hunter, and we will be free of that old man and his pathetic son." The video froze on her smiling face. I let the image hang there, a 50-foot-high confession looming over the city. The silence on the street was broken by the sound of a glass bottle shattering on the pavement. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Liar!" Then another voice joined in screaming, "Murderer!" The mood of the mob shifted like the tide before a tsunami. The people who had been throwing rocks at my building turned their anger toward the image on the screen. They realized they had been played. They realized they had been defending a monster. The news anchors began frantically correcting their stories live on air, stumbling over their words as the narrative crumbled beneath their feet. I stood at the window of my office looking down at the sea of people. Terrence stood beside me, his hand resting on my shoulder. We didn't smile. There was no joy in this victory. There was only the cold satisfaction of justice. The truth was out, and it was ugly, and it was undeniable. While the city of Atlanta was watching the video, Courtney was walking out of the television studio 5 miles away. She was still riding the high of her performance. The makeup artists had touched up her face, and the producers had told her she was brave. She walked out the back exit expecting to see a limousine waiting to take her back to the hotel. She expected to see fans cheering for her. She had her phone in her hand, ready to check her social media likes. She stepped out into the cool evening air and smiled at the flashing lights. She thought they were paparazzi. She raised her hand to wave, practicing the sad but hopeful wave of a grieving widow. But the lights were not from cameras. They were blue and red. Detective Miller stepped out from behind a patrol car. He was not smiling. Behind him stood 4 uniformed officers, their hands resting on their holsters. The studio security guard stepped back, sensing that the script had flipped. "Courtney Hayes," Detective Miller said, his voice cutting through her fantasy. "You are under arrest." Courtney froze, her hand still raised in that fake wave. She looked confused. She looked like an actress who had missed her cue. "What is this?" she asked, forcing a laugh. "Is this for my protection? Did Douglas send people to hurt me?" Detective Miller walked up to her and pulled the handcuffs from his belt. "We saw the video, Mrs. Hayes. The whole world just saw the video. You are under arrest for the attempted murder of Terrence Hayes, conspiracy to commit fraud and grand larceny." Courtney's eyes went wide. "What video?" she shrieked, backing away until she hit the brick wall of the studio. "That is a lie. That is a deep fake. You can't prove anything." Miller didn't argue. He spun her around and slammed her against the wall. The sound of the cuffs clicking shut was the sweetest sound I could imagine. She started to scream. It wasn't the delicate cry she had used on the talk show. It was the primal scream of a trapped animal. She thrashed and kicked, yelling about her rights, yelling about her lawyer, yelling that she was the victim. The news crews that were stationed outside the studio turned their cameras on her. They captured every second of her meltdown. They broadcast her twisted face, her ruined makeup, and her desperate profanity to the same audience she had tried to manipulate minutes ago. "Can I make a call?" she screamed as they shoved her into the back of the squad car. "I have the right to a phone call. I need to call my lawyer." She didn't call her lawyer. Sitting in the back of the police cruiser with her hands cuffed behind her back, Courtney begged the officer for her phone. She told him she needed to call a family member to arrange bail. The officer, a young man who had just watched the video on his phone, looked at her with disgust, but handed her the device. She dialed Hunter's number. Her fingers were trembling so hard she mistyped it twice. She pressed the phone to her ear, pushing it against her shoulder, because she couldn't use her hands. It rang, and it rang, and it rang. "Pick up Hunter," she whispered, tears of panic streaming down her face. "Pick up, you coward. Come get me. Fix this." The ringing stopped. Then a mechanical voice spoke. The voice was cold and final. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Please check the number and try again." She pulled the phone away and stared at it. No longer in service. That was impossible. He had just called her an hour ago to tell her she did a great job on the show. She quickly opened her banking app. She needed to check the emergency fund. They had a joint account in the Caymans, a safety net with $5 million for exactly this kind of situation. If she had money, she could hire the best lawyers. She could fight this. The app loaded slowly, the little spinning wheel mocking her. Then the balance appeared on the screen. 0. She blinked. She refreshed the page. 0. She checked the transaction history. A single withdrawal had been made 10 minutes ago. The transfer description was just one word: goodbye. The phone slipped from her shoulder and fell onto the floor of the police car. Courtney stared at the mesh screen separating her from the driver. The realization hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. Hunter hadn't just left. He had cashed out. He had taken the money from the company sale, he had taken the emergency fund, and he had taken the private jet they had chartered for their escape. He had watched her on TV. He had seen the tide turning. And while she was busy playing the victim, he was busy becoming a ghost. He had used her to kill her husband. He had used her to get the money. And now that she was burning, he was flying into the sunset with everything she had destroyed her soul to get. She was not a partner. She was a pawn, and the game was over. Courtney let out a sound that wasn't a scream or a cry. It was a broken whimper. She curled up on the hard plastic seat of the police car as the sirens began to wail. Outside the window, the city of Atlanta blurred into streaks of light. She was going to jail. She was going to prison for the rest of her life. And the man she did it for was probably opening a bottle of champagne at 30,000 feet, laughing at how easy it was to trick a greedy woman. Back in my office, I watched the news report of her arrest. I saw the footage of her being shoved into the car. Terrence closed his laptop. "He is gone, Dad," Terrence said quietly. "Hunter is gone. He cleared the accounts before the freeze fully took effect on the offshore funds. He has the money." I turned away from the window. The screen outside was still playing the video on a loop, a constant reminder of the truth. "He has the money for now," I said, picking up my cane. "But he made a mistake. He thinks money is the only thing that matters. He forgot that a father's rage travels faster than a private jet." We walked out of the office, leaving the lights on. The crowd outside parted for us as we walked to my truck. They didn't throw rocks. They didn't shout. They looked at us with shame and respect. We didn't acknowledge them. We had a plane to catch, and we had a hunter to hunt. The visiting room at the Fulton County Jail was a box of gray concrete and scratched plexiglass that smelled of industrial bleach and human misery. I sat on a bolted-down metal stool, waiting for the door on the other side of the partition to open. I had spent 40 years sitting in boardrooms negotiating with sharks in Italian suits, but I had never felt as cold as I did sitting in that room. I was not there to negotiate. I was there to demand the location of the man who had stolen my grandson. The heavy steel door buzzed and clanked open. A guard led Courtney in. She was wearing an orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big for her. Her hair, which had been perfectly styled for her television debut, was now pulled back in a messy knot showing dark roots. She looked tired. She looked stripped of her armor. But when she sat down and picked up the phone receiver, I saw that her eyes were still burning with a toxic mix of hate and defiance. I picked up the phone on my side. The plastic felt greasy against my ear. "Where is he, Courtney?" I asked. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I didn't ask how she was holding up. I went straight for the jugular. Courtney leaned forward, resting her forehead against the glass. She let out a laugh that sounded like dry leaves scraping together. "He is gone, Douglas," she whispered. "He is on a beach somewhere drinking rum and laughing at both of us. He cleared the accounts. He took the emergency fund. He left me with nothing but a court-appointed lawyer and a life sentence. I know he took the money," I said, my voice steady. "I don't care about the money. I want to know where he took the boy. Where is Leo?" Courtney looked up. Her eyes searched my face, and for a second I thought I saw regret. But then a shadow passed over her expression. She realized she had nothing left to lose. She realized that Hunter had betrayed her and I had destroyed her. She was drowning, and she decided that if she was going down, she was going to pull us down with her. She smiled. It was a cruel, jagged smile that exposed the darkness of her soul. "You are so worried about that boy," she said. "You are moving heaven and earth to get him back. It is almost touching. Tell me where he is." I commanded, gripping the phone so hard my hand shook. "Why do you care so much, Douglas?" she asked, tilting her head. "Why are you spending millions of dollars to save a child who doesn't even belong to your bloodline?" I froze. The air in the room seemed to vanish. "What are you talking about?" I asked. Courtney leaned closer to the glass, her breath fogging the surface. "You really are blind, aren't you? You and your stupid, sentimental son. You never questioned why Leo has hazel eyes, did you? You never questioned why he is so fair-skinned. You just assumed it was because of me, because I am white." She laughed again, a high-pitched sound that drilled into my skull. "Terrence was always so busy with work," she continued. "He was always traveling. And Hunter was always there. He was a good friend. He was comforting." "That is a lie," I shouted, standing up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You are lying to hurt him." "Am I?" she asked, her voice dropping to a hiss. "Think about the timing, Douglas. 7 years ago. The ski trip to Aspen. Terrence stayed behind to close a deal. Hunter and I went ahead to set up the cabin. That was the week Leo was conceived. Do the math. Check the calendar." I stood there staring at her. My mind was racing, trying to reject her words, trying to find the flaw in her logic. But the timeline fit. The ski trip. I remembered it. Terrence had been delayed for 3 days. "Go get him, Douglas," she whispered, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Go save Hunter's son. Raise him. Love him. And every time you look at him, know that you are raising the spawn of the man who destroyed your family. That is my gift to you." I slammed the phone down. I turned and walked away, leaving her laughing behind the glass. I walked out of the jail into the bright afternoon sun, but I felt like I was walking through a tunnel of darkness. Her words were poison. They were designed to kill the love we had for that boy. And the terrifying thing was that the poison was already in my system. The drive back to the estate was the longest of my life. I sat in the back of the town car, staring out at the passing trees. I wanted to keep this to myself. I wanted to bury her lies deep in the ground and never speak of them. But I knew I couldn't. Terrence was already fragile. If he found out later, if he found out after we saved the boy, it would destroy him completely. Secrets in a family are like termites. They eat the foundation until the house collapses. I had to tell him. Terrence was waiting for me in the library. He had cleaned himself up. He was wearing fresh clothes and pacing back and forth, his energy manic and desperate. When I walked in, he rushed over to me, his eyes wide with hope. "Did she tell you?" he asked, grabbing my arm. "Does she know where Hunter took him? Is he safe?" I walked over to the liquor cabinet and poured 2 glasses of whiskey. My hands were steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Sit down, son," I said, handing him a glass. Terrence took the glass, but he didn't sit. He looked at my face, and the hope drained out of his eyes, replaced by fear. "What is it, Dad?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Is he dead?" "Did she say he is dead?" "No," I said quickly. "He is alive." But Courtney said something, and I need you to listen to me, and I need you to stay calm. I took a deep breath. I told him. I told him everything she said. I told him about the ski trip. I told him about the hazel eyes. I repeated her words exactly as she had said them, not sparing him a single drop of the venom. When I finished, Terrence stood frozen in the middle of the room. He looked like he had been shot. He didn't scream. He didn't throw the glass. He just stood there, blinking slowly as if his brain was trying to reboot. "That is ridiculous," he said, finally, his voice sounding tinny and far away. "She is lying. She is a psychopath, Dad. She is just trying to hurt us." "I know, son," I said softly. "I know she is a liar. But we have to consider the source. We have to be sure." Terrence shook his head violently. "No. No, we don't. Leo is my son. I held him when he was born. I cut the cord. He has my nose. He has my smile." He walked over to the bookshelf where the family photo albums were kept. He pulled down the leather-bound volume from 7 years ago. His hands were shaking so hard he almost dropped it. He threw it onto the desk and flipped it open, tearing the pages in his haste. "Look," he said, pointing at a picture of Leo as a baby. "Look at that. That is the Hayes chin. That is my grandfather's chin." I looked at the photo. I wanted to see it. I wanted to see my father in that baby's face. But now that the seed of doubt had been planted, all I could see were the questions. Was that really the Hayes chin, or was it just a generic baby feature? Terrence flipped the page. There was a picture of Leo at his 5th birthday party. He was laughing, his head thrown back. Standing behind him in the background, out of focus but present, was Hunter. Hunter was laughing too. Terrence stared at the photo. He stared at the way Hunter stood. He stared at the curve of Hunter's jaw. Then he looked at Leo's jaw. "Oh God," Terrence whispered. He grabbed the album and threw it across the room. It hit the wall with a heavy thud. "It can't be true," he yelled, dragging his hands down his face. "It can't be true. I love him. He is my life." He ran out of the library and into the hallway. I followed him. He stopped in front of the large antique mirror that hung by the stairs. He leaned in close, staring at his own reflection. He looked at his dark eyes. He looked at his broad nose. Then he pulled out his phone and opened his lock screen. It was a picture of Leo. He held the phone up next to his face in the mirror. He looked back and forth, comparing, analyzing, searching for himself in the boy he had raised. "He doesn't look like me." Terrence choked out a sob, breaking in his throat. "He doesn't look like me, Dad. He has her eyes, but he has Hunter's forehead." "Look at the hairline." "Stop it, Terrence," I said, grabbing his shoulder. "You are seeing what you want to see. You are seeing fear." Terrence spun around and shoved me away. "Am I?" he shouted, tears streaming down his face. "Am I really? Or have I been blind for 6 years? Have I been raising another man's son while he stood in the corner and laughed at me? Did they plan this from the beginning? Was I just the wallet? Was I just the fool who paid for their happy family?" He collapsed onto the bottom step of the staircase, burying his face in his hands. "I don't know who he is anymore," he sobbed. "I look at his picture and I don't see my son. I see him. I see Hunter." I stood over my broken son and I felt a hate for Courtney that transcended anything I had ever felt before. She was in a cage, but she had managed to reach out and rip the heart out of my family. She had taken the one thing that gave Terrence strength, the love for his child, and turned it into torture. "We have to find out," I said, my voice hard. "We have to know the truth." Terrence looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. "How?" he asked. "Hunter has him. We can't test him." "We find them," I said. "And when we find them, we don't just take the boy back. We take a sample. And we end this question once and for all." Terrence nodded slowly. He wiped his face. He looked at the phone in his hand one last time. The picture of Leo smiled back at him, innocent and full of light. Terrence didn't smile back. Terrence didn't. He turned the screen off, plunging the hallway into darkness. The doubt was there now. It was a cold, heavy stone in the pit of our stomachs. We were still going to save the boy. We had to. But the mission had changed. We weren't just saving a son anymore. We were saving a question mark. And the answer terrified us more than any bullet ever could. The phone on the dashboard lit up like a flare in the dark cabin of the car. It was an unknown number, but we both knew exactly who was on the other end. Terrence was gripping the steering wheel so hard that the leather creaked under his hands. We were tearing down the interstate doing 90 miles an hour, but time felt like it had stopped completely. I reached out and pressed the speaker button. The sound of wind and heavy machinery filled the car, followed by a voice that sounded like it was being strangled by panic. "I know you are coming, Douglas." It was Hunter. He didn't sound like the arrogant man who had whispered in the church anymore. He sounded like a cornered rat snapping its teeth at the trap. "Listen to me, Hunter," I said, keeping my voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding my veins. "You have nowhere to go. The accounts are frozen. The police are watching the airports. Just bring the boy back and we can talk." "Talk?" Hunter laughed, a jagged, broken sound. "There is no talking. There is only trading. I am at the shipping yards off the coastal highway. You know the place, Douglas. It is where you crushed my father's business 20 years ago. It seems poetic, don't you think?" I looked at Terrence. His eyes were wide, fixed on the road, but I could tell he was listening to every breath Hunter took. "What do you want?" Hunter Terrence shouted toward the dashboard. "Don't hurt him! If you touch him, I will kill you!" Hunter ignored the threat. He was past the point of fearing death. He was operating on pure survival instinct now. "I want a helicopter," he said. "I want it on the roof of the main terminal building in 30 minutes. And I want $10 million in bearer bonds. I know you keep them in your private vault, Douglas. Don't lie to me." "I can't get a helicopter in 30 minutes, I said, trying to buy time. And the bonds are in a secure facility. I need an hour. You have 20 minutes, Hunter screamed, his voice cracking. And if I don't hear the rotors by then, I am going to throw this kid off the crane. Do you hear me? I will drop him into the ocean and you can fish him out with a net. Daddy, the small, terrified voice cut through the static. It was Leo. Daddy, help me. He is hurting my arm. It is windy up here. The line went dead. The silence that followed was heavier than the humid Atlanta air outside. Terrence let out a sound that was half sob and half roar. It was the sound of a father whose heart was being ripped out of his chest. Hang on, Dad, he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. He shifted gears and the engine of the sports car screamed in protest. The speedometer climbed past 100, 110, 120. The world outside the windows blurred into streaks of red taillights and white headlights. We were not driving anymore. We were flying low to the ground in a metal missile aimed straight at the heart of our enemy. I gripped the handle above the door, my body pressing back into the seat as the G-force hit us. I watched my son drive. He was a man possessed. He wove through the evening traffic with a precision that was terrifying. We cut across 3 lanes of traffic, missing a semi-truck by inches. The horn of the truck blasted a long, angry note that faded behind us in seconds. Slow down, son, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You can't save him if we are dead. I am not slowing down, Terrence said, his eyes locked on the horizon. He has my son. He is on a crane, Dad. He is going to drop him. We tore past the exit signs, the city skyline falling away behind us as we headed toward the industrial coast. The road here was darker, the streetlights fewer and farther between. The smell of salt water and diesel fuel began to seep into the car through the vents. This was the edge of the world. This was where the desperate came to hide. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I wasn't afraid of dying. I was 68 years old, and I had lived a full life. But I was afraid for Terrence. I was afraid that his rage was blinding him. He was driving with tears in his eyes, his vision compromised by the fear of losing the only thing that mattered to him. We have 10 minutes, Terrence said, glancing at the digital clock on the dashboard. We can make it. We are going to make it. I looked at him, and for a moment I saw the little boy he used to be, the boy who would run to me when he scraped his knee, the boy who trusted me to fix everything. But I couldn't fix this with a bandage. I couldn't fix this with a check. Just keep your eyes on the road, I said. We are close. I can see the lights of the port. The phone on the dashboard chimed. It wasn't a call. It was a notification sound, a simple, cheerful ping that sounded completely out of place in our high-speed nightmare. Terrence's eyes flicked down to the screen. Don't look at it, I warned. Just drive. It might be him, Terrence said. It might be Hunter changing the location. He reached out his hand, shaking slightly, and tapped the screen. It wasn't a text message. It was an email notification. The subject line was in bold capital letters. Urgent paternity test results re-Vance Law Group. Time seemed to slow down. The roar of the engine faded into a dull hum. The flashing lights of the passing cars became streaks of slow-motion color. I saw Terrence's finger hover over the email. Don't open it, Terrence, I said, my voice rising in panic. Not now, this is a distraction. This is Courtney trying to get inside your head. But he couldn't help it. The seed of doubt that Courtney had planted in the jail cell had grown into a vine that was choking him. He needed to know. He needed to know if the boy he was risking his life to save was his flesh and blood, or the son of the man who wanted to kill him. He tapped the screen. The email opened. It was a PDF document bearing the logo of a prestigious genetic testing lab. Terrence's eyes scanned the document. I saw his face change. I saw the color drain from his skin, leaving him gray and ashen. I saw his mouth open in a silent scream of agony. I leaned over and looked at the screen. The words were blurry at this speed, but the numbers at the bottom were clear. They were bold. They were red. Probability of paternity 0.00%. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. 0%. Not a low chance. No chance. Terrence made a sound that I will never forget as long as I live. It was the sound of a soul breaking. He didn't say a word. He didn't look at me. He just reacted. He slammed his foot onto the brake pedal with the force of a man trying to stop the rotation of the earth. The car didn't just stop. It violently rejected the laws of physics. The tires locked up instantly, screaming against the asphalt with a sound that tore at my eardrums. Smoke billowed up around us, white and thick, smelling of burnt rubber. The back of the car fishtailed wildly, swinging out to the right. We spun. The world outside became a carousel of lights and darkness. We spun once, twice. I braced myself against the dashboard, watching the concrete median barrier rush toward us and then pull away. Other cars swerved around us, their horns blaring, their drivers terrified by the smoking machine spinning in the middle of the highway. Finally, with a lurch that snapped our heads back, the car came to a halt. We were sitting sideways in the middle of the interstate, facing the concrete divider. The engine stalled. The silence that rushed back into the car was sudden and absolute. We sat there for a moment, breathing hard, the smell of smoke filling the cabin. Traffic was stopped behind us, a line of headlights stretching back for miles. Terrence stared straight ahead at the gray concrete wall. His hands had fallen from the steering wheel and were resting limp in his lap. He looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. "He isn't mine," he whispered. His voice was so quiet I could barely hear it over the idling engines of the cars behind us. "He isn't mine, Dad." Courtney was telling the truth. "The test says 0%. He looked at me and his eyes were empty. The fire was gone. The desperation was gone. There was only a vast, dark hollowness. "Why am I driving?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Why am I rushing to save him? He is Hunter's son. Let Hunter have him. They deserve each other." He reached for the door handle. "I am done," he said. "I am done being the fool." He opened the door and stepped out onto the highway. The wind whipped at his clothes. He stood there in the middle of the road, surrounded by angry drivers and honking horns, looking like a man who had just woken up from a dream only to find himself in a nightmare. He turned his back on the car. He turned his back on the port. He turned his back on the boy who was waiting on the crane. "Terrence, get back in the car," I shouted, unbuckling my seatbelt. "No," he yelled back, not looking at me. "It is over. I am not saving another man's legacy." He started walking away, walking back toward the city, walking away from the destination. I watched him go, and for the first time that night I felt true terror. Not because of Hunter, not because of the cliff, but because Courtney had fired a bullet from inside her jail cell, and it had hit my son straight in the heart, stopping him cold when he was the only hope a little boy had left. The phone on the dashboard buzzed again. It was a text from Hunter. 5 minutes. I looked at the phone. I looked at my son walking away into the darkness. And I realized that the hardest part of the chase wasn't catching the bad guy. It was convincing the good guy that there was still something worth running for. The sports car sat motionless in the middle of the highway with steam rising from the tires like the ghosts of our momentum. The traffic behind us had stopped honking. The drivers had realized that the two men sitting in the smoking wreckage were not just reckless but broken. I looked at Terrence. He had opened the door and stepped out onto the asphalt, but he hadn't walked away yet. He was standing there with his back to me, his shoulders slumped under the weight of a truth that was heavier than any coffin. I unbuckled my seatbelt and climbed out of the car. My legs were stiff and my old injury from the truck crash ached, but I ignored it. I walked around the hood of the car to where my son stood. The wind from the ocean was picking up, carrying the smell of salt and coming rain. It whipped Terrence's jacket around him, but he didn't seem to notice. He was staring at the concrete divider, at the gray nothingness. "He isn't mine, Dad," he whispered again. He turned to look at me and his face was a ruin. The tears had dried, leaving tracks on his cheeks, but his eyes were red and raw. "I looked at the results," he said, his voice trembling. 0%. That means every birthday party, every bedtime story, every time he called me Daddy, it was all a lie. It was a joke that Hunter and Courtney were playing on me. He pointed a shaking finger back toward the city, toward the jail where Courtney sat. "Why should I die for him?" he asked, his voice rising to a shout. "Why should I drive off a cliff or walk into a bullet for another man's son? Hunter is on that crane. Let him deal with it. It is his blood. It is his problem." He leaned back against the hood of the car, covering his face with his hands. "I am done, Dad. I can't do it. I can't look at him and know. I can't save a lie." I stood there on the highway watching my son crumble. I felt a surge of rage, but it wasn't at him. It was at the world that had done this to him. But rage wouldn't fix this. Sympathy wouldn't fix this. He didn't need a hug. He needed a wake-up call. He needed to remember who he was. I took a step forward. I grabbed his wrists and pulled his hands away from his face. He looked at me, surprised by my strength. "Look at me," I commanded. He tried to look away, but I wouldn't let him. I raised my hand and I slapped him. Harder than I had in the house, hard enough to snap his head to the side, hard enough to leave a mark. He stumbled back, looking at me with shock and betrayal. "You listen to me, Terrence Hayes!" I roared, my voice drowning out the idling engines of the cars behind us. "You are acting like a coward. You are acting like a man who thinks biology is the same thing as fatherhood." I stepped into his space, forcing him to back up against the car. "You think a DNA test makes a father?" I asked, poking him in the chest. "You think sperm makes a father? That is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. A dog can sire a puppy, Terrence. A rat can sire a litter. Biology is an accident. It is a biological function. It means nothing." I pointed back toward the city, toward the unseen hospital where I had held him when he was born. "Do you remember when you had pneumonia when you were 6? I asked. "Do you remember who sat in the chair by your bed for 3 nights without sleeping? Do you remember who held the bucket when you were sick? Do you remember who taught you how to ride a bike and held onto the seat so you wouldn't fall?" "It was you," Terrence whispered, tears filling his eyes again. "Yes, it was me," I said. "And do you know why? Not because we share some genetic code, not because of a blood test, but because I chose you. Every single day I woke up and I chose to be your father." I grabbed his shoulders, shaking him. "Hunter didn't choose Leo. Hunter chose to use him as a pawn. Hunter chose to put him on a crane and threaten to drop him into the ocean. That is what a biological father is doing right now. He is trading his flesh and blood for a helicopter and a bag of cash." I leaned in close, my nose touching his. "But you, Terrence, who taught that boy to tie his shoes? You. Who put Band-Aids on his scrapes? You. Who read him stories until your voice was hoarse? You. Leo doesn't know about DNA," I shouted. "Leo doesn't know about affairs or lies. All he knows is that he is cold and he is scared and he is waiting for his daddy to come save him. And in his mind, that daddy is you." Terrence looked at me. His lip was trembling. The hardness in his eyes was cracking, breaking apart under the weight of the truth. "But he isn't mine," he choked out one last time. "He is yours," I said, my voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "He is yours because you put in the work. He is yours because you loved him when it was easy, and you have to love him now when it is hard. Family isn't about whose blood runs in your veins, son. It is about whose blood you are willing to bleed for." I let go of his shoulders. I stepped back. "Now you have a choice. You can stand here on this highway and feel sorry for yourself and let that boy die. Or you can get back in that car and go be the father he thinks you are. You can go show Hunter that being a father is a job for a man, not a monster." I turned and walked back to the passenger side. I opened the door and got in. I sat there looking straight ahead, waiting. For a long moment, nothing happened. The wind howled around the car. The drivers behind us started honking again, impatient and angry. Then I heard it, the sound of a shoe scraping against the asphalt. Then the door opened. Terrence slid into the driver's seat. He didn't say a word. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. He took a deep breath, a shuddering breath that seemed to pull the soul back into his body. He looked at me. The doubt was still there, buried deep, but the resolve was burning brighter. He wiped his face with his sleeve. He reached out and tapped the screen of the phone, turning off the email notification. He deleted the file. "Let's go get my son," he said. He slammed the car into gear. The engine roared to life, sounding less like a machine and more like a beast waking up. The tires spun, catching the pavement with a scream. We didn't just accelerate, we launched. The car shot forward, leaving the confused traffic behind us. We tore down the highway, the speedometer climbing higher than before. Terrence drove with a cold, terrifying focus. He wasn't driving out of fear anymore. He was driving out of love. A fierce, protective love that defied logic and science. "Hunter wants a war." Terrence said, his eyes locked on the lights of the port that were growing larger in the distance. "He wants to talk about blood. I am going to show him what blood really means." We passed the sign for the Port Authority. The cranes loomed ahead like giant metal skeletons against the night sky. We were coming for them. And God help anyone who stood between a father and his child. The shipping container terminal at the port of Savannah looked like a graveyard for giants under the pale moonlight. Massive steel boxes were stacked 5 high, creating a labyrinth of rust and shadows that stretched out toward the black water of the Atlantic Ocean. The wind here was ferocious. It howled through the gaps between the containers, sounding like the screams of the damned. It carried the smell of diesel fuel and rotting seaweed, a smell that burned the back of my throat as we stepped out of the car. We had parked at the edge of the loading dock where the asphalt ended and the dark water began. Above us, looming like a prehistoric beast, was the number 4 crane. It was a tower of steel girders and cables that swayed slightly in the gale. And there, standing on the maintenance platform 50 feet above the churning waves, was Hunter. He was holding Leo. My heart stopped beating for a second. From this distance, my grandson looked so small. He was wearing his favorite blue pajamas, the ones with the rocket ships on them. They were flapping wildly in the wind. Hunter had one arm wrapped tightly around Leo's chest, pinning the boy against the rusted railing. In his other hand, catching the glint of the security lights, was a silver pistol. Hunter looked down and saw us. He didn't wave. He didn't shout. He just pressed the barrel of the gun against Leo's temple. "Stay back!" He screamed, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Stay back, or I will paint this dock with his brains!" Terrence made a sound of pure animal distress. He started to run toward the crane ladder, his eyes fixed on his son. I grabbed him. I grabbed his belt and yanked him back with all the strength I had left. "Stop," I shouted into his ear. "You can't rush him. If you run, he shoots. If you climb, he throws him. We have to talk him down." Terrence looked at me. His face was wet with tears and spray from the ocean. He was shaking. He looked ready to die. "He has my son, Dad. He has my son." "I know," I said, gripping his arm. "And we are going to get him back. But we have to be smart. Follow my lead." I let go of him and walked forward. I walked slowly, my hands raised in the air, showing Hunter that I was unarmed. I left my cane in the car. I needed to stand tall. I needed to look strong. I walked until I was directly below the platform, standing in the circle of light cast by the crane's floodlights. "Hunter," I yelled, pitching my voice to carry over the wind. "We are here. We are alone. No police. Just us." Hunter peered over the edge. His hair was whipped across his face, giving him the look of a madman. "Where is the helicopter?" he screamed. "I don't hear rotors, Douglas. I told you 30 minutes. Time is up." I took a deep breath. I had to lie. I had to buy time. But looking at Hunter, looking at the wild desperation in his eyes, I realized that lies wouldn't work. He was too far gone. He needed reality. He needed to know that his escape plan was already dead. "There is no helicopter, Hunter," I said, my voice steady and cold. "And there never will be." Hunter stiffened. He pulled Leo closer to the edge. The boy screamed, his legs kicking uselessly over the abyss. "Then he dies," Hunter shrieked. "You think I am bluffing? You think I won't do it?" "I think you are a businessman, Hunter," I shouted back, taking another step forward. "I think you did all of this for money. You poisoned my son for money. You stole my company for money. You don't want to kill a child. You want to spend your millions." Hunter laughed. It was a jagged, broken sound. "You are right, old man. I want my money. So give me the bonds. Give me the transport, and maybe I will let the brat live." I shook my head slowly. "It is over, Hunter. I checked the accounts. I called the bank. The transfer to the Cayman Islands was flagged. The federal government froze the assets 10 minutes ago." I paused, letting the words sink in. "You have nothing. The accounts are empty. The jet is grounded. You are not a millionaire anymore. You are just a broke man on a bridge with a kidnapping charge." Hunter froze. The wind whipped around him, but he didn't move. He stared down at me, his mouth opening and closing. "Liar," he whispered. "You are lying." "Check your phone," I challenged him. "Check the balance. Go ahead." Hunter hesitated. He kept the gun pressed to Leo's head, but he shifted his weight. He reached into his pocket with his free hand and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen with his thumb. I watched his face. I watched the moment the light went out of his eyes. He stared at the screen. He tapped it again frantically. Then he let out a howl of rage that was louder than the wind. He threw the phone over the edge. It tumbled down 50 feet and smashed into pieces on the concrete near my feet. "You ruined it," he screamed. "You ruined everything." He looked down at me, and for the first time I saw true madness. He wasn't calculating anymore. He wasn't negotiating. He was a man who had looked into the future and seen only prison walls. And if he was going to hell, he wanted company. "You took my money," he said, his voice dropping to a terrifying calm. "You took my life, so now I am going to take yours. I am going to take the only thing you have left." He turned Leo around, facing him toward the dark water. He wasn't looking at the money anymore. He was looking at the end. "Say goodbye to your grandpa, Leo," Hunter said, raising the gun. "No," I screamed. "I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just moved." I ran toward the metal ladder at the base of the crane. My 68-year-old legs pumped with a power I didn't know I had. Terrence was right behind me. Hunter saw us coming. He smiled. He lifted the gun from Leo's head and pointed it down at us. "Stop!" he yelled. He fired. The bullet sparked off the metal railing inches from my face. I didn't stop. I grabbed the cold steel rungs and started to climb. He fired again. This time I felt a hammer blow to my left shoulder. The impact spun me around. Pain exploded in my arm, hot and searing. I almost let go. I almost fell. But I looked up and saw Leo's terrified face. "Keep climbing," I told myself. "Keep climbing, you old fool." I pulled myself up onto the platform. I was bleeding. My arm was useless, hanging by my side, but I was there. Hunter looked shocked. He hadn't expected me to make it. He backed up, dragging Leo with him. He was standing on the very edge of the platform. One step back and they would both fall into the sea. "Don't come any closer," he warned, pointing the gun at my chest. "I have one bullet left, Douglas. It is for the boy, or it is for you. Choose." I stood up, swaying slightly. The pain in my shoulder was blinding, but my mind was clear. "Let him go, Hunter," I wheezed. "Look at him. He is innocent. This is between you and me." Hunter looked at Leo. The boy was crying silently, tears streaming down his face. Then Hunter looked at me. The hate in his eyes was absolute. "He isn't innocent," Hunter spat. "He is a haze. He is part of the poison." He raised the gun. He pointed it straight at Leo's forehead. His finger tightened on the trigger. I didn't have a weapon. I didn't have a plan. I only had my body. I dove. I launched myself across the metal grate. I wasn't aiming for Hunter. I was aiming for the space between the gun and the boy. The gun went off. The sound was deafening. I felt a rush of air past my ear. I felt the heat of the muzzle flash, but I didn't feel the bullet. I crashed into Leo, knocking him sideways, away from the edge, away from the gun. We hit the metal floor hard, rolling together. I covered his small body with mine, shielding him. Hunter stumbled back. He had missed. He had fired his last shot, and he had missed. He looked down at the empty gun in his hand. Then he looked up. Terrence was there. My son had climbed the ladder behind me. He vaulted over the railing like a lion. He didn't say a word. He didn't hesitate. He hit Hunter with the force of a freight train. It wasn't a fight. It was a demolition. Terrence slammed into Hunter, lifting him off his feet. They crashed into the control panel of the crane. Hunter tried to hit back. He tried to gouge Terrence's eyes, but he was fighting a father who had just watched his son almost die. Terrence rained blows down on him. He hit him with his fists. He hit him with his elbows. He was screaming a primal, wordless scream of rage. "You touched him," Terrence yelled, smashing Hunter's face into the metal floor. "You touched my son." Hunter was pinned. He was bleeding. He was broken. He tried to crawl away, but Terrence grabbed him by the collar of his expensive jacket and dragged him back. Terrence stopped. He held Hunter over the edge of the railing. Hunter's feet dangled over the black water. Hunter looked down at the drop, then up at Terrence. His eyes were wide with fear. "Don't," Hunter begged, blood bubbling from his lip. "Don't drop me." Terrence looked at the man who had destroyed his life. He looked at the drop. I could see the struggle in his eyes. He wanted to let go. He wanted to end it. "Terrence," I called out from the floor where I was holding Leo. Terrence looked at me. I was clutching my bleeding shoulder, holding his sobbing son. "Don't do it," I said softly. "He isn't worth it. Don't let him turn you into a murderer. You are a father. Be a father." Terrence looked at Hunter one last time. He looked at the fear in the villain's eyes. "You are right, Dad," Terrence said, his voice cold as ice. "He isn't worth the stain on my soul." He pulled Hunter back from the edge and threw him onto the metal grate like a bag of trash. Hunter curled into a ball, coughing and wheezing. Terrence turned and ran to us. He fell to his knees, wrapping his arms around me and Leo. Leo cried, burying his face in his father's chest. "Daddy, you came. You came." I looked at Terrence. He was crying too. He was kissing the top of Leo's head over and over again. He didn't care about the DNA test. He didn't care about the lies. He was holding his son. I leaned back against the railing, clutching my shoulder. The sirens were wailing in the distance, getting closer. The blue lights were reflecting off the water. "We did it," I whispered to the night sky. Hunter groaned on the floor, trying to sit up. I looked at him. He was beaten. He was broke. And he was going to prison for a very long time. I smiled. The pain in my shoulder was bad, but the feeling in my heart was good. The war was over, and the good guys had won. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room hummed with a sound that felt like a drill boring directly into my skull. My left shoulder was throbbing with a dull, heavy ache where the bullet had grazed the muscle. The doctors had stitched me up and told me I was lucky, but I didn't feel lucky. I felt tired. I felt old. I sat on the edge of the hospital bed with my shirt off and a thick white bandage taped across my chest. The smell of antiseptic and rubbing alcohol was thick in the air, masking the lingering scent of the ocean and gunpowder that still clung to my skin. Across the room, Terrence sat in a hard plastic chair. Leo was asleep in his lap, curled up into a tight ball with his thumb in his mouth. My son looked like a statue carved out of grief. He had fought like a lion at the docks. He had saved us both. But now that the adrenaline was fading, the darkness had returned to his eyes. He was holding the boy, but he wasn't really holding him. His arms were stiff. He was looking at the top of Leo's head with a mixture of love and devastating pain. I knew what he was thinking. He was thinking that he had just risked his life to save another man's legacy. He was thinking that the child sleeping on his chest carried the blood of the monster who had tried to kill us. I wanted to say something. I wanted to tell him to let it go. I wanted to tell him that biology didn't matter, just like I had said on the highway, but I knew that was easier said than done. The doubt that Courtney had planted was a poison more potent than arsenic. It was eating him alive from the inside out. He was tracing the line of Leo's jaw with his eyes, looking for Hunter in the features of the innocent boy. The door to the private room opened and the silence broke. I expected a nurse with pain medication or a police officer with more questions, but it was neither. Priestley walked in. My attorney looked as immaculate as ever, even at 3 a.m. She was wearing a sharp navy suit and carrying a thick leather briefcase, but her face was grim. She didn't offer a greeting. She didn't ask how my shoulder was. She walked straight to the foot of my bed and set the briefcase down on the rolling table with a heavy thud. Terrence looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Is Hunter in custody? He is in surgery," Priestley said, her voice crisp and professional. "You did a number on his face, Terrence. He will survive, but he won't be winning any beauty pageants. The police have him under guard. He isn't going anywhere except prison." Terrence nodded slowly, looking back down at Leo. "Good. That is good." Priestley looked at me, then at Terrence. She sensed the tension in the room. She was a woman who made a living reading what wasn't being said. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. It wasn't a legal brief. It looked like a medical file. "I have been busy while you were playing action heroes," Priestley said. "When Courtney made those claims about Leo's paternity, I knew we needed to get ahead of it. I knew she would try to use it as leverage in the divorce or to torture you. So I called in a favor with the judge. I got an emergency subpoena for Hunter's medical history. I argued that since he was accusing you of fraud and claiming biological rights to the child, we had a right to see his records." Terrence tensed. He pulled Leo slightly closer as if protecting him from the words. "I don't need to see it," Terrence said, his voice cracking. "I already know. I saw the email. The DNA test was 0%. Priestley frowned. "What email?" "The one Courtney's lawyer sent me," Terrence said, closing his eyes. "On the highway. It said 0% match. Leo is Hunter's son." Priestley let out a short, sharp breath that sounded like a laugh of disbelief. She walked over to Terrence and stood directly in front of him. "Terrence, look at me," she commanded. He looked up. "Courtney's lawyer didn't send you an email," Priestley said. Courtney doesn't even have a lawyer right now because her assets are frozen and no one will take her case. That email was a forgery. It was a fake document she created on her phone in her jail cell to make you crash your car. Terrence shook his head. But the test, it looked real. Priestley slapped the file in her hand. This is real, she said. This is Hunter's medical file from the Mayo Clinic dating back 15 years. She opened the file and pulled out a document highlighting a paragraph in yellow marker. She held it up so we could both see it. Hunter contracted a severe case of mumps when he was 22 years old, Priestley explained. It led to a condition called orchitis. It caused severe inflammation and permanent damage. She looked Terrence dead in the eye. Hunter is sterile, Terrence. He has been sterile for 15 years. He cannot father children. It is medically impossible. The room went completely silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator in the corner and the soft breathing of the sleeping boy. Terrence stared at the paper. He stared at the yellow highlighter. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He blinked rapidly, trying to process the information. Sterile, he whispered. Completely, Priestley confirmed. He has a sperm count of 0. He couldn't have fathered Leo if he wanted to. He couldn't have fathered anyone. I sat up on the bed, ignoring the pain in my shoulder. A wave of relief washed over me, so powerful it almost knocked the wind out of me. It wasn't just relief. It was vindication. Courtney lied, I said, my voice trembling with rage. She knew he was sterile. Of course she knew. Priestley said, closing the file. She lied to Hunter too. She probably told him Leo was his to get him to go along with the kidnapping. She played both of you. She told Hunter that Leo was his son to manipulate his ego, and she told you that Leo was Hunter's son to break your heart. She wanted you to hate the boy. She wanted you to leave him on that crane. Terrence looked down at the boy in his lap, the boy who was still sleeping peacefully, unaware that his existence had been the subject of a war. He looked at Leo's nose. He looked at Leo's chin. Suddenly the resemblance that had vanished on the highway returned. It was there. It was undeniable. It was in the curve of the ear. It was in the shape of the brow. It was in the way Leo's hand curled into a fist while he slept just like Terrence's did. Oh my God, Terrence choked out. The tears came then. They weren't the quiet tears of despair he had shed in the car. They were violent, racking sobs that shook his entire body. He buried his face in Leo's neck, inhaling the scent of his son. The scent of shampoo and childhood and safety. He is mine, Terrence sobbed. He is really mine. He is yours, son, I said, feeling my own eyes fill with tears. He was always yours. Terrence rocked back and forth, holding Leo so tight I was afraid he might wake him up, but Leo just stirred slightly and murmured "Daddy" in his sleep before settling back down. I am sorry, Terrence whispered into Leo's hair. I am so sorry I doubted you. I am so sorry I almost walked away. Priestley watched them, her professional mask slipping for just a moment to reveal a soft smile. She reached out and touched Terrence's shoulder. You didn't walk away, she said gently. You came back. You fought for him even when you thought he wasn't yours. That is what makes you his father, Terrence. The biology is just a bonus. Terrence looked up at me. His face was wet and his eyes were swollen, but the darkness was gone. The shadow that Hunter and Courtney had cast over our family had finally lifted. Dad, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you. Thank you for slapping me. Thank you for making me get back in the car. I smiled, leaning back against the pillows. That is what fathers do, I said. We knock some sense into each other. I watched them together. My son and my grandson. The chain was unbroken. The legacy was safe. Courtney was in a cell. Hunter was in chains, and we were here in this bright, sterile room together. Priestley packed up her briefcase. I will let you get some rest, she said. I have to go file the motion to strip Courtney of all parental rights. With this evidence and the kidnapping charges, she will never see the outside of a prison again, and she will certainly never see this boy again. She walked to the door and paused. By the way, she added, looking back, Hunter is asking for a deal. He says he will testify against Courtney if we drop the kidnapping charges. Terrence looked up. His eyes were hard again, but this time it was a clean, protective hardness. Tell him to go to hell, Terrence said. Tell him he can rot. I don't need his testimony. I have the truth. Priestley nodded and walked out. I looked at my son. He kissed Leo's forehead one more time and then leaned his head back against the wall, closing his eyes. He looked peaceful. For the first time in months, he looked truly peaceful. The medical twist hadn't just saved a legal case. It had saved a soul. It had given a father back his son not just in body but in spirit. And as I drifted off to sleep listening to the rhythmic breathing of my family, I knew that no amount of money in the world could buy what we had in that room. We had the truth, and the truth had set us free. The Fulton County Superior Court was packed tighter than Sunday service on Easter morning. The air conditioning was struggling to keep up with the body heat of 300 people who had gathered to watch the final act of the Hayes family tragedy. The room smelled of floor wax and nervous sweat. I sat in the front row directly behind the prosecutor's table. My left arm was still in a sling from the bullet wound, and my shoulder throbbed with a dull ache that reminded me I was alive. Beside me sat Terrence. He looked like a new man. The dark circles under his eyes were gone. He held Leo on his lap, and the boy was coloring in a book, completely oblivious to the fact that his mother was about to fight for her life 10 feet away. The bailiff called the court to order, and the heavy oak door to the holding cell opened. A hush fell over the room as the defendants were led in. Hunter walked in first. He was unrecognizable from the arrogant man who had strutted into the funeral. His face was a map of purple and yellow bruises, a souvenir from the beating Terrence had given him on the crane. His nose was bandaged, and he walked with a limp, the swagger replaced by a shuffle. He wore a gray prison jumpsuit that washed out his complexion, making him look like a ghost. Then came Courtney. She had lost her beauty. Without the expensive makeup, without the designer clothes, and without the confidence of her schemes, she looked small and brittle. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, highlighting the sharp angles of her face, which was now twisted into a permanent scowl. She refused to look at the gallery. She refused to look at Terrence or Leo. She kept her eyes fixed on the table in front of her, staring at her handcuffs as if she could melt them with her mind. They sat at the defense table, separated by their lawyers. They didn't look at each other. There was no solidarity between thieves today. There was only the cold, hard instinct of survival. The trial began with the usual formalities, but the tension in the room was electric. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named District Attorney Reynolds, laid out the case. She spoke of the poison found in the landfill. She spoke of the frozen bank accounts. She spoke of the kidnapping at the port. It was a damning narrative, but we all knew that the real drama would begin when the defense took its turn. Hunter's lawyer stood up first. He was a public defender, a tired man who knew he was fighting a losing battle. He didn't try to argue that Hunter was innocent. Instead, he tried to paint him as a victim of love. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the lawyer began, his voice shaky, "my client, Mr. Hunter, is a man who made mistakes. But he was not the architect of this crime. He was manipulated. He was seduced. He was used by a woman who wanted to kill her husband and needed a fall guy." Courtney's head snapped up. She stared at Hunter, her mouth open in shock. Hunter continued to look straight ahead, refusing to meet her gaze. The lawyer continued, "Mrs. Courtney Hayes is the one who bought the poison. She is the one who administered it. My client simply fell under her spell. He was trying to protect her. He went to the port not to kidnap the child, but to negotiate a safe passage because he was terrified of what she might do to him." "Liar!" The scream cut through the courtroom. Courtney stood up, knocking her chair back. Her face was red with rage. "You are a lying coward, Hunter!" she shrieked, pointing a finger at him. "You told me to do it. You gave me the website to buy the arsenic. You said it was the only way we could be together." Order in the court. The judge banged his gavel, but Courtney was just getting started. She turned to the jury, her eyes wide and frantic. "He is the monster," she yelled. "He planned everything. He told me Terrence was weak. He told me the old man was senile. He promised me an island in the Caribbean. I wanted a divorce, but he said no. He said we needed the money. He said we had to kill them both." Hunter stood up, then his face twisting with hate. "You shut your mouth, you witch," he roared. "You begged me to help you. You said Terrence bored you. You said you wanted him to suffer. You laughed when he got sick. I saw you laugh." The courtroom erupted. The reporters were typing furiously. The jury members looked back and forth between the two defendants like they were watching a tennis match in hell. It was exactly what I had hoped for. When rats are trapped, they don't fight the trap. They eat each other. I looked at Terrence. He wasn't angry. He was watching them with a look of pure pity. He was watching the woman he had slept next to for 6 years reveal her true face. It wasn't the face of a wife, it was the face of a parasite. The judge threatened to have them gagged, and they finally sat down, breathing hard, staring daggers at one another. They had done the prosecutor's job for her. They had confirmed the conspiracy. But there was one piece of the puzzle left, one final nail that needed to be hammered into their coffins to ensure they never saw daylight again. District Attorney Reynolds stood up. She looked calm. She looked confident. "Your Honor," she said, "the state has one final piece of evidence to present. It was recovered from a cloud server account belonging to Mr. Hunter. It seems that while the defendants were planning their crime, Mr. Hunter was planning an insurance policy of his own." Hunter went pale. He knew what was coming. He tried to signal his lawyer to stop it, but it was too late. The large screens mounted on the walls of the courtroom flickered to life. The video was shaky, filmed from a phone that had been propped up on a kitchen counter. The scene showed Courtney standing in the kitchen of my son's house. She was wearing an apron. She was humming a happy tune. On the counter in front of her was a blender filled with a protein shake. The Courtney on the screen reached into her pocket and pulled out a small brown glass jar, the same jar we had found in the landfill. She unscrewed the cap. She looked directly at the camera, not knowing she was being filmed by Hunter, who was standing in the doorway holding his phone. "Is this enough, baby?" Hunter's voice asked from behind the camera. Courtney smiled. She tipped the jar, pouring a generous amount of white powder into the blender. "Let's give him a double dose today," she said, her voice clear and cheerful. "I am tired of waiting. I want to order that new car by Friday." She pressed the button on the blender. The whirring sound filled the courtroom. She poured the poisoned shake into a glass. "Here is to widowhood," she said, raising the glass in a mock toast. "And here is to being rich." The screen went black. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the silence of horror. Even the most hardened reporters looked sick. There was no gray area here. There was no crime of passion. This was cold, calculated evil filmed by a partner who was too treacherous to trust even his accomplice. Courtney stared at the blank screen. She didn't scream this time. She slumped in her chair as if her spine had dissolved. She knew it was over. The video proved intent. It proved malice. It proved that she was a monster who killed for money and laughed while doing it. Hunter put his head in his hands. His insurance policy had become his death warrant. The jury didn't need to deliberate for long. They didn't even leave the room. The foreman whispered to the judge, who nodded solemnly. The verdict was read within the hour. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, guilty. On the charge of kidnapping, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy, guilty. The judge, a stern man with white hair, looked over his glasses at the two broken people before him. "I have sat on this bench for 30 years, he said, his voice echoing in the silent room. "I have seen anger, I have seen violence, but I have never seen such casual cruelty. You two did not just try to kill a man, you tried to destroy a family, you tried to erase a legacy, and you did it with a smile." He paused, looking at Leo, who was still coloring in his book, oblivious to the fact that justice was being served. "Hunter Vance and Courtney Hayes, I sentence you both to life in prison without the possibility of parole. You will die in a concrete box, and may God have mercy on your souls, because this court certainly does not." The gavel came down with a sound like a thunderclap. The courtroom exploded into applause. It wasn't polite applause. It was a release of tension. It was the community cheering for the victory of good over evil. Courtney started to cry, but no one looked at her. The bailiffs hauled them up. Hunter tried to say something to me as he was dragged past. He looked at me with pleading eyes. "Douglas, please," he begged. "I can help you with the business. I know where the rest of the money is." I didn't even turn my head. I kept my eyes on the judge. Hunter was a ghost to me now, a bad memory that was fading fast. Terrence stood up. He picked up Leo. He didn't look at Courtney as she was led away in chains, screaming his name. He walked past the defense table without breaking stride. We walked out of the courtroom together, 3 generations of Hayes men. The heavy doors swung shut behind us, sealing the darkness inside. Outside on the courthouse steps, the sun was shining. The media was waiting. The cameras flashed. The microphones were thrust in our faces. "Mr. Hayes, how do you feel?" the reporter shouted. "Do you have a statement?" I looked at the crowd. I looked at the people who had supported us and the people who had doubted us. I looked at my son, who was holding his head high for the first time in months. I stepped up to the microphone. "I don't have a statement," I said, my voice strong and steady. "I have a warning. To anyone who thinks they can come for my family, to anyone who thinks they can mistake our kindness for weakness, look at those empty chairs in there. That is what happens when you cross a father who loves his son." I turned away from the cameras. "Let's go home," I said to Terrence. We walked down the steps, leaving the circus behind. We had our lives back. We had our name back. And most importantly, as I watched Leo reach up and grab his father's hand, I knew we had our future back. The nightmare was over. The waking up could finally begin. 6 months have passed since the gavel fell in that courtroom, and the silence that followed was the loudest sound I have ever heard. It was not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of a storm finally breaking to reveal a clear blue sky. Atlanta has changed, or perhaps I have just changed the way I look at it. The skyscrapers still gleam in the sun, and the traffic still snarls on the interstate, but the empire I built feels different now. It is no longer a fortress designed to keep people out. It has become a lighthouse designed to bring people in. I sat in the corner of the new office suite we rented downtown. We sold the old headquarters building. It had too many ghosts in the hallways, too many echoes of the days when we measured our worth by our stock price. This new space is open and bright with glass walls that let the light touch every corner. I watched Terrence sitting at his desk. He was not the same man who had crumbled on the highway. He was not the same man who had let a woman poison him by inches. He sat with his shoulders back, his head held high, talking to a young man sitting opposite him. The young man was crying. He was holding a picture of his daughter and telling Terrence a story that sounded painfully familiar. A story of a spouse who lied, a system that failed, and a bank account that had been drained. I watched my son listen. He didn't interrupt. He didn't look at his watch. He leaned forward and offered the young man a tissue, and then he offered him something more valuable. He offered him a strategy. The Hayes Family Legal Defense Fund was Terrence's idea. He took the money we recovered from Hunter's offshore accounts, every single dime of the $10 million, and he didn't buy a new car. He didn't buy a yacht. He poured it into a foundation dedicated to helping victims of domestic fraud and parental alienation. He hired the best lawyers in the state, including the shark who had defended us, and put them to work for people who couldn't afford a parking ticket, let alone a defense attorney. I watched him work and I realized that the poison hadn't killed him. It had purified him. It had burned away the softness and the naivety, leaving behind a core of solid steel. He wasn't just my son anymore. He was a king in his own right, ruling over a kingdom of justice. He looked up and saw me watching him. He didn't look away in shame like he used to. He smiled. It was a genuine smile that reached his eyes. He pointed to the clock on the wall. It was time to go. We had a standing appointment that was more important than any board meeting. We drove north out of the city, leaving the noise and the concrete behind. The old Ford truck was still in the shop, getting a new radiator after I used it as a battering ram, so we took the sedan. The drive was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence. We didn't need to fill the air with words. We understood each other now in a way that fathers and sons rarely do. We had been to the edge of the cliff together, and we had pulled each other back. We pulled up to the cabin by Lake Lanier just as the sun was beginning to dip below the tree line, painting the water in shades of gold and violet. This was my sanctuary. It was the place I came to when the world got too loud. But for the last 6 years, I had come here alone because Courtney hated the bugs and Hunter preferred the beach. Today, the cabin wasn't quiet. It was filled with the sound of running feet and a high-pitched voice shouting instructions. "Grandpa, look, I've found a worm!" Leo came sprinting down the dock, holding a dirt-covered nightcrawler in his small hand like it was a diamond. He was wearing a life vest that was slightly too big for him and a fishing hat that covered his ears. He looked healthy. The shadows that had been under his eyes during the trial were gone, replaced by the rosy glow of a childhood reclaimed. I sat down in my folding chair on the end of the dock and watched. Terrence walked over to him. He didn't wince at the dirt. He knelt down on the wood, getting onto Leo's level. "That is a beauty," Leo Terrence said, inspecting the worm with serious concentration. "That is a bass catcher for sure. Do you remember how to hook it?" Leo nodded, his face a mask of determination. "You have to be gentle so he stays wiggly." I watched them. I watched the way Terrence guided Leo's hands. I watched the way Leo leaned into his father, trusting him completely. I looked for the resemblance that had haunted us on the highway. I looked for the nose and the chin and the eyes. I saw them. They were there, but I also saw something else. I saw the way Leo tilted his head when he concentrated, just like Terrence. I saw the way he bit his lip when he cast the line, just like Terrence. I realized then that the DNA test was just a piece of paper. It was a scientific fact, but it wasn't the truth. The truth was happening right in front of me on that dock. The truth was in the patience Terrence showed when the line got tangled. The truth was in the way Leo looked up at his father, as if he hung the moon and the stars. The line bobbed in the water. "I got one!" Leo screamed. Daddy, I got one. Reel it in, son. Terrence laughed, steadying the rod. Keep the tip up. Don't let him run. The water splashed and a small silver fish broke the surface. It wasn't a monster. It was barely big enough to keep, but the cheer that went up from the dock sounded like we had just won the Super Bowl. I sat there feeling the cool breeze off the water, and I felt a peace so profound it brought tears to my eyes. This was the legacy. It wasn't the buildings in downtown Atlanta. It wasn't the millions in the bank. It wasn't the name on the side of the trucks. It was this. It was a father teaching his son to fish without fear. It was a family that had survived a fire and come out stronger on the other side. I closed my eyes and listened to their laughter. I thought about the journey that had brought us here. I thought about the funeral where I sat next to a murderer. I thought about the whisper in the casket. I thought about the truck crashing through the gate and the race to the port. It felt like a different lifetime. It felt like a story that happened to someone else. But the scar on my shoulder throbbed gently, a reminder that it was real. People ask me if I regret the cost. They ask me if I regret the millions we lost in stock value during the scandal, or the legal fees, or the destruction of the property. They look at the balance sheet and they see red ink. I look at the balance sheet and I see the best investment I ever made. I spent 40 years chasing the dollar. I thought money was the shield that would protect my family from the world. I thought if I piled the gold high enough, the wolves couldn't get in. But I was wrong. The wolves were already inside, sitting at my dinner table drinking my wine. The money didn't protect us. It blinded us. It took losing the money or thinking we had lost it to see the truth. It took a near-death experience to learn how to live. I opened my eyes and looked at the horizon. The sun was gone now, leaving behind a twilight sky filled with the first stars of the evening. Terrence and Leo were packing up their gear, walking back down the dock hand in hand. My name is Douglas Hayes. I am 69 years old. I have been a CEO, a tycoon, and a formidable man. But those are just titles. They are costumes we wear to impress strangers. My real job, my only real job, is sitting right there. It is being the father who didn't give up. It is being the grandfather who climbed a crane. If you are listening to this story, I want you to look at your own life. Look at the people sitting at your table. Do you trust them with your life or just your money? Do you love them because of their blood or because of their heart? Don't wait for a funeral to find out. Don't wait for a tragedy to wake you up. Take it from an old man who had to die to learn how to live. The only treasure that matters is the one that holds your hand when the darkness comes. Terrence called out from the shore, "Hey Dad, are you coming? Leo wants to roast marshmallows." I stood up. I picked up my chair. "I am coming, son," I shouted back. I walked down the dock toward the firelight. I didn't look back at the dark water. I walked toward the warmth, toward the laughter, toward the family that I had built, broken, and rebuilt again. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just Douglas the survivor. I was Douglas, the happy man. Thank you for listening to my story. It was a hard road, but I would drive it again 1,000 times just to get to this moment. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Share this with someone you love, someone you might need to forgive, or someone you need to fight for. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done on that highway? Would you have turned back? Until next time, keep your eyes open, keep your family close, and never let anyone tell you that it is too late to start over. This is Douglas Hayes signing off. The greatest lesson I learned from this nightmare is that family is not defined by the blood running through your veins, but by the blood you are willing to bleed for one another. For years, I thought my legacy was the empire I built and the millions I secured. I was wrong. My true legacy was watching my son choose love over biology on a dark highway. We often confuse paternity with fatherhood, but they are not the same. Paternity is a biological fact. Fatherhood is a daily heroic choice. Don't let pride or DNA tests dictate your heart. The only true father is the one who shows up. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more. And I have a question for you. If you were in Terrence's shoes on that highway, would you have turned back? Let me know in the comments below.